Good morning. Good morning. I think we're ready to start. If people would like to take their seats. Thank you so much. Welcome to the second and the final day of Spanish Armada TIDE International Conference, exploring the Armada and other maritime themes. So I would like once again to welcome our friends from TIDE, the EU Atlantic Area Project, and staff from Sligo County Council, and of course our many, many friends and supporters here this morning. So could I get you just to check that your mobile phone is off, please? That was very well timed. Thank you for that. So, as we begin to understand more of the Armada and the extensive records that have come to light, we're going to begin this morning with a look at the archival resources that are available for further research and study. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Paula Martin.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I must apologise because I have slides full of words and numbers. But if anyone is seriously interested, I do have printouts. You can ask me afterwards. And this is really inspired because having come back to Armada studies after years of doing other things, I was so delighted to find what resources there were online, free to download of the Spanish sources. So I thought I'd tell you all about them. And apologies to those who know it all already. The historical branch of the Spanish Navy between 1980 and 2015, led by Rear Admiral José Ignacio González Hierro, assembled, edited and published transcripts of some 7,000 documents, together with detailed commentaries. This provides, as never before in such detail, a chronological narrative through the vast documentary record of Spain and beyond. Fewer than half these documents had previously appeared in print. Few documents related to the Armada in Spain's state archives seem to have escaped the researchers, and the editors also included material from many private collections, such as the archive of the Marquis of Santa Cruz. Also included are Spanish translations of many documents concerning England's response to the threat posed by Spain, and relevant items from other foreign archives, including Florence, Rome, Vienna, and Dubrovnik, and from the Medina Sidonia collection in the Carpeles Manuscript Library in California. This ambitious project took many years to complete, and some of the 5 planned volumes had to be split into several parts, thus filling 10 physical volumes. The first was published in 1988, the second the following year, Volume 3 in 1993, and these volumes all had indexes. Then there was a long gap until Volume 4 appeared in 2014 in 4 parts and with no index, and Volume 5 in 2015, and they're all currently available to download free of charge. So from now on, I'll refer to them as BMO. They effectively replace the previous edited collection of Spanish documents published by Cesareo Fernández Duro in 2 volumes in 1884-5. If you're looking for a general history of the Spanish Armada and the ships involved in it, this new source is almost complete. There are, of course, many more specialist publications relating to specific aspects of the Armada and its aftermath, such as the medical services, the fate of the prisoners, or the accounts of the survivors who made it back to Spain. In terms of statistics, previous publications have relied heavily on the so-called Lisbon muster, a list of ships, men and materials gradually gathered in Lisbon by the Marquis of Santa Cruz from 1586. However, this list looks as if, at least in places, it was based on theory rather than reality. Much of the planning was done by the Marquis of Santa Cruz, but after leaving Lisbon in 1587 proved unachievable, he died in February 1588, leaving things in a bit of a muddle. The king ordered the Duke of Medina Sidonia to take over. Medina Sidonia was experienced at organizing fleets and supplies, having overseen the annual transatlantic treasure fleets. He was also a great aristocrat from whom no one could object to taking orders. he efficiently restored order and got the Armada ready to sail. Surprisingly, he decided to make public the final list of the ships, men, and equipment of the Armada. This so-called Lisbon Muster was printed as a 44-page pamphlet setting out the precise situation on the 9th of May, 1588, 19 days before the Armada finally set sail. The fleet was soon scattered in a storm, and nearly 2 months went by before it was reassembled, resupplied with food and water, and ready to leave Corunna. In this time, a few vessels had dropped out, and there'd been many transfers of men and equipment between vessels. BMO contains several lists, mainly of men and guns, compiled while the fleet was in Corunna, which allows us to update much of the information in the Lisbon Muster. The Lisbon Muster printed the names and tonnages of every ship, and the numbers of soldiers, sailors, guns, and other necessaries, right down to the last biscuit, and included lists of the clergy, the medical staff, and the legal and administrative teams which were needed for the fleet to function. What may not have been planned for is the numbers of servants the officers and others brought with them. There were also entretenidos and aventureros. These were officers not offered an appointment but taken along almost as spares, and others with military experience who just wanted to be involved and share in the glory. And some of these gentlemen adventurers were eventually usefully employed. Francisco de Cuellar, for example, was appointed at Corunna to captain the Castilian San Pedro, though he was later demoted and moved to Lavia. Some of these adventurers brought numerous servants with them, and most of them probably tried to serve on the most prestigious ships. So these are the figures for such men, who were all individually listed in the Lisbon Muster, and the table on the right is a simplified version. So although these non-combatants only amounted to 6% of the total, this still meant a lot of extra mouths to feed, and must surely have meant that some, if not all, the vessels must have been overcrowded, especially when you think of the quantities of food, water, live animals, weapons, and ammunition also being carried. Sailors worked in shifts, so they didn't all sleep at the same time, meaning they could double up on sleeping space. But soldiers and others, as far as we know, all slept at the same time. So it's unimaginable. So the precise numbers of soldiers allocated to each vessel did not correspond with the size of existing military units. So this meant that companies of soldiers had to be split between 2 or more ships, which can't have been helpful to either morale or logistics. But while the soldiers would have been employed had the Armada landed, the servants were probably the least useful of the non-combatants and consumed rations as well as taking up space. Some of the gentlemen adventurers left the fleet at Corunna, having had enough, presumably took their servants with them, but others did stay on. The Prince of Ascoli, for example, was sent around the fleet with instructions off Calais and got stranded in Calais, presumably leaving most, if not all, of his 40 servants aboard the fleet. Probably because the resource is so vast, BMO doesn't include documents such as the lading lists relating to individual ships, so anyone researching one particular ship could find out considerably more by going to the archives in Simancas Castle, where there's an amazing amount of detail on what was loaded onto individual ships and the accounts of those survivors who made it back to Spain and claimed their arrears of pay. The other thing BMO does not include is the handful of vessels which were added to the fleet at the last minute, drawn from ports close to Corunna. We know that not every ship which left Lisbon reached the Channel, but in a few cases, replacements were commandeered at Corunna, for which the only documentary source seems to be local archives recording their safe return. These vessels were few and had little or no effect on the outcome of the enterprise. A handful of little supply vessels and one larger one added to the Levant squadron. But the real bonus is in Volume 5, which is annexes and appendices. The most important is Annex 5, over 200 pages, filling 44% of the volume. Here, all the relevant sources already presented are assembled to provide a life history of each ship, The information gathered together here allows us to compare ships and squadrons with far more accuracy than could be done using the Lisbon muster. In Corunna, soldiers, sailors and guns were moved between ships for logistical reasons. Some guns not originally intended for shipboard use, for example, were only usable on the largest ships, where there was room for the unwieldy land carriages that some of them were mounted on. Ammunition needed to be matched up to the wide range of guns on board the Armada. There may also have been attempts to reduce the overcrowding on the most popular ships, and these ship biographies are very thoroughly referenced. In Colin Martin and Geoffrey Parker's new publication, Armada, these ship biographies have been used to construct tables containing information about the ships, their crews, and their armament. And what proved particularly interesting was the history of each ship before and after the Armada, and their final fates. At squadron level, one can compare the numbers of each squadron which survived. Although we're now confident that the squadrons were administrative groupings rather than fighting units, they do in general terms consist of specific types of vessel, for example, the Castilian galleons. The numbers of ships of each squadron which failed to return does seem to reflect the major differences between royal galleons, transatlantic galleons, hired Mediterranean merchant ships, hired North Atlantic merchant ships, galleasses, and the little pataches and zabras which, being of shallower draught, could perhaps find better shelter from the storms. Certainly their survival rate was high considering their small size. Some vessels had suffered battle damage. Many lost anchors when they fled the fire ships, which made it harder to shelter from the storms they encountered on the way home. In general, those of Mediterranean build suffered worse than those of Atlantic build. Intended to carry profitable bulk cargoes over a relatively short life, they were not designed to serve as artillery platforms, nor to sail in the North Atlantic. But we'll come back to that. A number of vessels from all squadrons reported that firing their guns while the guns were lashed to the ship's sides resulted in the ships being pulled apart, so a lot were leaking badly. Such comparisons could have been done before, but using BMO made it easier to see what happened to those ships which did get back to Spain, and a number of those which got back safely proved unfit for further service. And this table demonstrates the short afterlives of the Armada fleet. Once hired ships were returned to their owners, their fates were often not known. But of the ships which returned to Spain and whose fates are recorded, none is known to have survived beyond 1596. Ironically, perhaps, the longest-serving Armada vessel seems to have been Nuestra Señora del Rosario, the flagship of the Andalusian squadron, which surrendered to Sir Francis Drake in the Channel. She was put on display as a symbol of England's triumph until she was so rotten she was built into a wharf in 1618. If BMO has a downside, perhaps it is that the more information you're presented with, the more questions are raised. For example, all three of the ships wrecked at Stregia had served in the fleet which sailed to the Azores in 1583, led by the Marquis of Santa Cruz. Having previously assumed that the Mediterranean merchantmen of the Levant squadron, such as this, were embargoed for their cargo capacity, but were not strong enough to survive in the Atlantic, perhaps we need to think again. Of the 11 Levant squadron vessels listed, we now know that 7 had sailed to the Azores in 1583, 4 of these had also been in the previous year's fleet, and 1, Annunciada, had also served at the conquest of Portugal in 1580. What did their owners think of this enforced military service? What were these vessels' attributes which led to them being embargoed more than once? Of the 7, 4 or 5 were Ragusan built and 2 were Venetian, and those of the Levant squadron which didn't serve in the Azores fleet include all 3 of Genoese build. Is this significant? We don't know how many of the Levant squadron had previously ventured into the Atlantic on merchant voyages, but we do know that both Lavia and San Juan de Sicilia were embargoed on their way back from England. Lavia had actually been in harbour in Margate, which was the intended location for landing the Armada's troops. Was service in the Armada the final straw for these vessels after their previous military excursions into the Atlantic? Does the evidence suggest that the Spanish admirals were not just embargoing any large ships they thought suitable, but that the embargoing exercise was more targeted, seeking out ships which Santa Cruz had employed before and had performed well? Or was it simply that in an age when embargoing merchant ships to augment a naval fleet was the norm, the pool of available and suitable vessels in the right place at the right time was not very large? And all this is coincidental. The ships of the Levant Squadron were certainly large and did carry lots of troops. This table shows the 9 Armada vessels which left Corunna carrying over 300 soldiers. 5 are Portuguese galleons and 4 are from the Levant Squadron, including Juliana. Which brings us to another observation. The various squadrons and their apparent cohesion has led us to lumping vessels together within broad categories. The extra information within these ship biographies allows us to see these vessels much more clearly as individuals rather than types. I apologize to those here who know far more about Juliana than I do. Here are just a few facts about the 3 vessels wrecked off Strait de Strand. I spent some time last year sorting out which Diego Enriquez was which, and I think it's now clear that the man whom Cuellar recorded as dying on the beach was Diego Tellez Enriquez, who sailed as an adventurer on San Juan de Sicilia, was given command of the Tercio of Sicily after Diego Pimentel died. At some point, we don't know when or where, he transferred to Santa Maria de Vison. There's no English equivalent of BMO, and for several reasons, we know much less about the English ships. As they were defending their home coasts, they were based in ports from Plymouth in the west to the Thames estuary in the east, so they didn't sail as one unit. They're listed by the port they were based in rather than any other characteristics. Nor, of course, did they need to fill their ships with vast supplies of food and drink. Some crucial records are missing for 1588. However, we can find out quite a lot about what happened to these vessels after 1588. In contrast to the Spanish and embargoed vessels, many of the English ships had surprisingly long lives, and this can be attributed to several factors. One is that the race-built design, which was being introduced at the time, did produce vessels which were fast and very seaworthy compared with the Spanish vessel on the right. Not only were the newest ships built to this design, but some older ones were altered to make them closer to this new design. Another is that English gun drills were not only twice as fast at reloading, but they didn't have the Spanish problem of a wide range of gun and shot sizes expressed in numerous different measurement systems. The prolonged lives of English vessels are unlikely to have been due to the quality of their timber, but could perhaps be related to several recent improvements. One was the introduction of diagonal bracing within ships' hulls, strengthening them considerably both to carry the greater weight of armament and to reduce the resultant stresses on the hull, which we've seen had pulled apart Spanish ships. Another was the introduction of sheathing, thin planks nailed over the main hull, covering a layer of tar mixed with horsehair or old rope. These planks were intended to be sacrificial, to absorb some of the damage aimed at the main hull timbers, as the planks were much easier to replace. But their main purpose was to deter shipworm from entering the main timbers. In these thin planks, the worms couldn't burrow far, and they were unable to turn round. And as they couldn't stand the tarry material they encountered when trying to burrow deeper, they were stuck. Another reason for the apparently long lives of English ships was that they were sometimes, quote, rebuilt. Perhaps it was easier to get funds for major refits than for complete new builds. However much new timber got used in a rebuild, but there must have been enough of the original to satisfy the accountants. Perhaps it also reflected a desire to suggest strength and longevity within the Queen's fleet. But it's quite a dramatic contrast to the Spanish ships, and one of them even 103-year life. So I hope this has inspired some of you to download BMO and find out more about whatever you're interested in, but particularly about the 3 ships which were wrecked on Streeder Strand. Whatever means may be used to convey information to the general public, we should strive to be as accurate as possible and also as interesting in the material we present. And BMO gives us a great opportunity to do this, as does the wide range of archaeological finds, which definitely help to bring the story alive. We know so much about life on board an Armada ship, and this greatly enhances the possibilities, the potential for virtual reality displays. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Very interesting as usual, and great research gone into that. One of the main themes today is an exploration of the uses of modern technology like virtual and augmented realities to tell historical stories. This has been done to great effect in the Tower Museum in Derry. To describe the process involved and also some of the broader themes relating to the migratory journeys that are at the centre of this experience, please welcome Ronan McConnell.
Hi, folks. It's a great pleasure to be here, a little late to this fantastic event. I'm very sorry to have missed most of yesterday, but I hear it was fantastic. It's great to see you all here today, celebrating the relationship between Ireland and Spain and the impact the Spanish Armada has had on our culture and our heritage over the last few hundred years. I'm here from the Tower Museum in Derry, and I'm here to talk to you about VR experiences and the theme of migration, which has shaped our past from the very first settlers to this island. The TIDE project, for those of you who don't know, is funded by Interreg Area Europe. I'm just going to start my timer, sorry. Funded by Interreg Europe. And it explores the relationship in maritime heritage between certain countries in Western Europe and exploring how that heritage can be promoted through the use of VR, exciting new VR. And for the past few years, we've been working together, Madeira, Donegal, Devon, Derry, Strabane, Clarté in France, and Cadiz in Spain, and Cantabria Council in Spain as well, promoting these VR experiences and creating new pilots. And it's been very exciting for us to talk about our shared heritage and to meet. And so it's very poignant to be here today, wrapping up in many ways the TIDE project, even though we're entering an exciting new final phase in Derry. So without much further ado, I'll just crack on into it. So we've done 2 main experiences, and we have another one coming. I'm going to talk about the one on the top left called Afloat and Ashore. As many of you know, in Ireland, we have a huge migration heritage, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. And both of these are really immersive experiences. Immersive VR experiences means you put on a headset or you put yourself in an environment where you are there. You are in that area of the past. You're recreating in a scene, and the scene we've recreated is the port of Derry, Londonderry, in 1892, which is right in the heart of the city, where millions of people left, well over 1 million people left for new life, many of them never to return. The second one is about the First World War. It's Kaipaloon. It's a shared pilot with Devon and Donegal, which Lena's going to talk about later, so I won't spoil the surprise too much there. Our VR experiences are based on our collections, museum collections, our objects, and also our archives. And we wanted to be able to bring them to life from 2D to 3D. And we've done that really successfully. and lots of people have been using it. We use a variety of hardware and software, from headsets to AR on your phones to access it, to promote it. And the topics are 19th century emigration, migration, immigration, the first settlers from the Mesolithic, Neolithic, and also the First and Second World Wars. So this is on the top left, Patrick Maxwell. He was a solicitor from Derry, from the East Wall, and he, in the 1890s, travelled many times over and back on vessels to America. And he was a writer, and he documented what he saw when he was travelling. And he documented a lot of migrants leaving Ireland, and he documented it very poignantly and very sadly, and he wrote about it a lot, and he had a beautiful turn of phrase. And his diaries, where he wrote everything that he experienced on these journeys, were given to us in the Tower Museum by a descendant of Patrick, and he asked us, could we do anything with them? And so we got very excited and started to create a VR. Michael Bradley, who gave us the VR experiences, sadly passed away before he could see it come into fruition. So we just had it as a tribute to him as well. But Patrick was a beautiful writer, and he wrote beautiful phrase. And while he was on the ship heading across the Atlantic, he would write things like, "Saturday morning after a stormy night found us both ill. I was up with the lark and wishing I was near his nest in the green fields of Ireland." Or he would talk about coming into New York and say, "No words could paint the scene as the immense ball of liquid fire sinks behind the low and dyes the clouds all the colours of the rainbow. We draw long breaths of admiration but are silent. The gorgeous light fades away, the stars peep out, and then across the wide waters, hundreds of fairy lamps suddenly spring into sight along the coast, from Coney Island all the way down to Long Branch. We move up through New York, through an electric light parade." And so when we saw this, we had to create a VR from it because, of course, Derry was lit by gas lamps, so no one had ever seen this before. I mean, you're a migrant coming from West Donegal, coming from West Sligo, and all of a sudden you're greeted by this illumination of a landscape with electric light. I mean, it's just incredible to imagine. And so we've recreated that in this scene. Patrick created many archives, took them with him. So that's the state of Nebraska, the ship that we sail across in. And these are the deck plans that were contained in the diaries. So we worked with a company called Zuber Rescue Interventions, who faithfully recreated the state of Nebraska, recreated the deck, recreated the Port of Derry using images, using archives, using drawings. What this really shows us is the power of VR and the power of recreation, and it doesn't have to be in recent times. You can go right back to the very beginning and recreate from archaeology, recreate from evidence. We are there, we're at the point where we can faithfully recreate these things and create this completely immersive environment. For example, on the top, and I know you can't see, it's kind of because of the light, but this is the Port of Derry in 1892. The image below is an image we have of it from that period, and the image above is just recreating the cattle sheds that people remember. The Guildhall has just been built, so we recreated that in 3D. It had been built the year before, so with the Statue of Liberty, coincidentally, so we were able to recreate that. On the right here, you have from our almanacs, drawings, lithographs of hotels that are long gone. Many of them have been, damaged during the Troubles, and the city centre is completely changed. We were able to recreate the Imperial Hotel. You could just see it on the top image on the right-hand side. We were able to recreate from that image and recreate a scene on a street of buildings that were long gone, and you could stand there and look at them and look at the size of them. And it's just been brilliant what we've been able to achieve in the project. So anyway, you put on your headset, you're standing there, you hear Patrick's voice, and you're about to migrate on the state of Nebraska as you head across the Atlantic. It's 1892. It's completely based on primary sources. We green screen captured the characters that Patrick mentioned that he met in the diaries. So with local actors, you can see them there in the top right. They talk to you and you interact with them. And many people, when they're walking around the booth that we created, we can hear them talking, go, "No, I'm fine, thank you." And you're like, "Oh, okay." You enjoy it whatever way you want, We've digitized a lot of collections. You can see here in the bottom right some of our old archives and posters from the 19th century, and we've recreated them and put them into the experience, inserted them in, so they found a new permanent home. You sign your name on the register. You can get a loan from the local landlord, Pat O'Donnell's Pub in Derry. the migration history, you know, the Waterloo Street, the Dunlow Bar, all of these places are mentioned in it, so that they are named for Donegal residents who left and went across to America. And for many people coming back, particularly from America, to use it, they find it really emotional to imagine what it was like for their ancestors over 100 years ago to actually leave and never come back and have no idea what they're getting themselves into, you know, in many cases. And it's really incredible to experience them watching that, you know, and they've flown back here or whatever, you know, and they're staying for a few days. To sum it all up, it's 2 weeks and 10 minutes, a 2-week voyage condensed into 10 minutes with all the emotion, all the awe, all the visual that you can see. It's all contained within those 10 minutes. And so it just seems to move really quickly along. It's been really successful. We've had over 5,000 people use it. Over 1 million people left the port in the 19th century. And we can trace that directly to 9 million diaspora across the world, which is really an incredible number. Think of people that have come from that can be traced back directly. So I'm going to move on anyway. This is a video where I'm just going to play just to show you what it's like. It's just a little promotional video. Thanks, Brendan. One of the downsides of using local actors, particularly people from Derry come and use it, is like, oh, that's your man Ben from up the road. Snaps them right out of it, you know. Yeah, 2 weeks and 10 minutes floating ashore. The next VR experience is called Beware Enemy Below, or Beware Convoy Below. And I'm not going to talk about that today because Lena's going to give you a really good presentation on the development behind that. So I'm just going to skip forward here. Feedback, we've had people from the ages of 4 to 84 use this experience. Kids love putting it on and just walking around and just, you know, trying to run off the boat into the sea because they have no fear and all this kind of thing. But they still really enjoy it. And then people, you know, who, you know, like on the bottom left there, that's my father. He's 78, and he used it, and you know, he'd never used anything like this. And you could see him just trying not to fall down stairs and interacting directly with people. But they all really enjoyed it. The feedback we got was incredible, and the connections with the diaspora too. But it's really powerful to be able to see the impact that this can have. You can go with any era in this. In Donegal, have created one based on the Trinidad Valenciera, which is fantastic. But you know, you can really delve into Armada heritage using this VR. You know, there's really very little limitation to it, just money. The new experience that we have in the final phase of TIDE is called Island City. Here is where Derry is. It used to be an island. For those of you familiar with Derry, there was, you know, the bog side and different places like that. I mean, it's called the bog side because it's boggy marshland, but that used to be a river, and Derry used to be an island. And it was natural for people to want to settle there because it provided a safe area or fortification where they could settle. And so that has silted up over the years, but that's why it's called the Island City. And what we wanted to do was show how that city is transformed, or how that island is transformed from the very first Mesolithic settlers and some of the oldest Mesolithic sites in the island, how that's transformed to the present day, you know, all the way through the different eras. And I'll talk a little bit more about that migration towards the end. But we've depicted some key eras, so we'll talk about maybe the first Christian era. We'll talk about the Norman kind of early medieval period. We're going to talk about the plantation period and the building of the walls. We're going to talk about the development of the port and show all the ships and show how the city's grown. Talk about the Second World War, where it was full of battleships, destroyers and planes and anti-aircraft guns. And then the present day with the Peace Bridge and this development of the city and the city of culture. The wonderful thing about Derry is that it shows all the key themes of the TIDE project and the impact of it by using this interactive map. And you'll be able to look down, zoom in, you'll be able to move things around, interact directly with it. It's very exciting for us. It's a very unusual VR experience to do. but it'll basically feel like, for any of you who ever watched Game of Thrones, the intro to Game of Thrones with the cogs and the towers and the wheels, and it'll be really epic. And we're really excited about that, just to show the transformation of the city in 7 minutes or whatever, over 7,000 years. So that's very exciting for us, and here's some examples of what it's going to look like. These are very early designs. We've just started this, so it's all hands on deck. We're working again with Zuber Curio, and they're going to design this interactive table. The story is that it's a Spanish galleon sailing across from Lough Foyle, and they're kind of wondering what's down there because they need to land somewhere. And they have this kind of map, interactive table, and when you go onto that table, it transforms you through different eras. So it's just a nice wee intro and a nice wee link as well to this. So that brings us on to La Trinidad Van Serra, and I just wanted to talk about these VR experiences that we're doing are all going into a new museum experience called DNA, which is opening in Edmonton. And the current offering we have in the Tower Museum is relating to the Trinidad Van Serra, and that exhibition opened some time ago, and a lot of work has gone into that exhibition with the local community, the local diving community, archaeologists and academics, and it's really popular and it's open. And for many people, it's it's £4 to entry, but a lot of days, like public holidays and all, it's even £1. So it's really cheap to get in and look around and see this experience down through the floors. And in that, we have obviously a lot of objects, but we have a lot of photographs and archives as well that have been kindly donated to us by people like Dave over the years. And it's just an incredible experience that you're going down through. I know Colin talked to you yesterday about it, so I'm not going to even dare go near the history of it. But we do have some great collections online as well as the exhibition, and you can travel down through, and it starts where you learn about the significance of the Spanish Armada as you're coming down from the top floor. But as you get through, you learn about what an incredible, how incredible that archaeological exploration was, how groundbreaking it was to use local divers and teach them how to work with archaeology, how to be careful about it. All the sand covering the wrecks, the amount of effort that had gone into raising those guns, the amount of effort that the local community and support from the local community that they got in that. And so it's fantastic to see some of the collection in the Initial Maritime Museum today as well. It's brilliant to see it closer to home too. In the middle there, I left, not to have a dig at the National Museum, but just to kind of show the letter from the National Museum explaining why they didn't want the collection of La Trinidad Van Serra in the National Museum, because they felt it had more to do with Spanish heritage than Irish heritage. And I just thought it was great to show that, because obviously you're all here today to show that that's not really the way of thinking now and how far that's come along. So it's really good to see that. So I just thought I'd be cheeky and put that in there, Obviously the collection went to the Ulster Museum, and the collection is on loan to the Tower Museum from the Ulster Museum. Here's some photographs from the exhibition, including a large siege gun with the large... And we have some of the diving gear as well, and we have some of the collections that were found, the olive oil jars and different things that were found on the collection. My favourite is the fretboard from the, not the mandolin, but citern, or I suppose it's citern, which is incredible, just to imagine sailors playing music on board. And also the little bowl found from the Ming Dynasty era, which shows the level of trade that was going on. Obviously a very invaluable piece at the time. To be found on this Venetian galleon. So there's some incredible collections there. The gun carriage wheels, the fact that they were recreated from the wheel that was found in Kinnigo, which you can see on display as well. We are bringing this exhibition into our new museum as part of a wider journey. So I'm just going to talk about a little bit of that as well. So DNA, Derry Londonderry in the North Atlantic. Yes, Derry isn't on the North Atlantic, but it's a very close relationship with the North Atlantic through migration, through the World Wars, through the first settlers, through our access to the coast. And this is a micro journey of the history of Ireland contained in one building, really. And, we think about it, the Northwest has it all. The mythological connections with Milesian, land of East, Iberia, and how that's in some way backed up through the strong DNA connections with Iberia as well that you get from DNA results from a lot of people here as well. That's carried on through the folklore and the proud folklore of people I know of in a show that have swarthy skin that reckon that they come from some of the wayward sailors that came off different Spanish Armada ships. It's something that people are really proud of, and it's a connection that needs to be explored more. From the very first settlers that came originally from Iberia and travelled up through Europe, travelled up through Britain, and travelled over to the north coast of Ireland. When we have DNA that can prove this. From our Celtic culture and how that came along, we are defined by migration and the movement of people. Vikings, Normans, or English and Scottish plantation settlers, our industry abroad, migration of the 17th century of Presbyterians to North America, migration of people from during the Great Famine and on to North America and Australian, immigration of new cultures today. Our landscape has always been defined by migration and the movement of people. And so in many ways, DNA is a kind of a microcosm of that, and shows how strong these stories are, particularly in the city, and how the city has developed as a result of them. It's very much in our DNA, the history of Ireland. And so as you go through, you'll learn about the first settlers, you'll learn about the industry of the city, you'll learn about the First and Second World Wars, you'll learn about the cultural heritage of the Troubles, you'll learn about the U-boat threat and the Battle of the Atlantic, and you'll learn about the very rich archaeological and unique heritage of the northwest coast of Ireland in the form of shipwrecks and underwater archaeology, which will be the final gallery in DNA, and where Litrin and Van Serra will very much have pride of place. We'll also be exploring the Laurentic. We'll also be exploring some of the collections from the U-boats and the B-17 bomber that crashed into Lough Foyle. But what we really want visitors to experience as they come through is how rich the archaeological heritage of the northwest coast is. I mean, when you see on a map that there's dozens of U-boats, that there's, passenger ships, that there's Second World War destroyers and airplanes, that there's prehistoric logboats in the banks of our rivers that are found yearly. It's a very rich archaeological heritage, and it's very much local archaeologists, local divers that have brought these to life, that bring it to the attention of the museum. And so we want to explore that story and explore the story of the city of Derry Sub-Aqua Club as well, and how influential they've been also. And so here you have one of the galleries that's going to show Litrin and Van Serra. It's going to be a little bit more compact than the 5 galleries currently in offer in the Tower Museum, but it's going to be very more direct in terms of the relationship between the divers and the work that they've done and the archaeological techniques, and how amazing it is that we have these collections preserved today, how incredible the story of the raising of the cannons are, even in more detail than it's currently explored. So we're very excited about that, about how you'll learn about all these different shipwrecks as you walk through, and the value of importance out there, and the sense of wonder you'll get from what lies beneath. In many ways, apart from space, what lies beneath the waves is our final frontier on Earth, and it needs to be explored a lot more. So this is kind of the feel. It'll be mysterious, it'll be very evocative, there'll be lots of blue hues and different things in it as well, but it will be very exciting, and it'll be very wonderful for visitors coming through. And it's a new chapter for us in terms of our relationship with Litrin and Van Serra, and the Spanish Armada and Spanish heritage, from our very first settlers to the present day. So I think that's it from me. Yeah, that's the last slide. So I just want to say thanks, and how that's wrapped together. The last thing that we'll do when you come out of this gallery is you'll get to experience all of the VR in one booth to tie it all together. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker. The Armada, which Spanish in name, was also a Portuguese campaign. It contained Portuguese ships and sailed from Lisbon. Our next speaker will speak about this campaign. His family are Portuguese by birth for many generations, but carry a very Irish name. And he will also describe this lineage, which occurred mainly in the aftermath of the Flight of the Earls. Please welcome Pedro O'Donnell Toscana Rico.
Chidiv, Pedro Isanandom, and I am truly grateful for this invitation, and it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here and be part of this meaningful event. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the Portuguese role in the whole expedition of the Spanish Armada. Not only because it was sailed from Lisbon, but also because around 40% of the ships and 30% of the crews were Portuguese. To do so, I think we need to do a little overview about the whole Portuguese job, about the history, about the discoveries, the era of discoveries. At a quick glance, Portugal emerged on the 12th century during the reconquest of the Andalusia. What is now Andalusia was Al-Andalus, and Dom Afonso Henriques was the first Portuguese king that was founded in October the 5th, 1143. The Knights Templar, as a direct consequence of the persecutions to the order and the subsequent extinction in 1312, a significant number of their members went to Portugal, where they were received and welcomed by Dom Dinis, the King of Portugal. Being welcomed, they settled and they brought a lot of knowledge and skills, such as geography, cartography, astronomy, navigation skills, weaponry, including military tactics and strategy, foreign languages, literature, knowledge on engineering, logistics, science, etc. That knowledge would be the basis for that allowed the Portuguese to sail to seas and begin what would be the age of discoveries, finding 2/3 of the world as we know it. The age of discoveries usually refers to the period between the 1400s and the 1600s, when global exploration took place at a level never seen before, having its peak throughout the 1500s. The Portuguese began exploring the African coast in the early 15th century, where they started to seek for a sea route to India to bypass the land controlled by the Muslims, the land route controlled by the Muslims. So the main goal was to try to find the source of gold, which they believed it was in West Africa. In 1415, the Portuguese conquered the city of Ceuta in Morocco, establishing the first foothold in Africa. They continued to explore the coast of Africa, establishing trading posts and fortresses along the way. Gradually, they expanded their control to most of West and Central Africa. One of the most significant figures in Portuguese exploration of Africa was Prince Dom Henrique, known to you as Henry the Navigator. Considered as the patron and the inspiration of the first Portuguese navigation voyages, he established a school of navigation in Sagres. It's in the south of Portugal, where he sponsored the voyages and exploration and the discovery. In this school, he gathered the best mathematicians, map makers, shipbuilders, and navigators of his time. These navigators included Bartolomeu Dias and Vasco da Gama, that also explored Africa. Bartolomeu Dias became the first European navigator to sail around the southern tip of Africa, what was once known as the Cape of the Torment became known since then as the Cape of Good Hope. In 1498, 10 years later, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea, and it was established the sea route between Europe and India by sea, accomplishing the goal that the Portuguese had to be the first ones and the only ones to get all the riches that were in India to bring them to Europe. So the Portuguese established several trading posts along the African coast, controlling the trade for West Africa, from West Africa all the way to India. Meanwhile, the final chapter of unifying Spain had begun, and in 1469, the marriage of the Catholic monarchs of Spain, and in 1942, the expulsion of the Moors from Iberia. It didn't take long for Spain to also start exploring the Atlantic, changing the Portuguese domination as a colonial power. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, sailing west, trying to reach India by sailing west, accidentally discovered the American continent. As a curiosity, in last September in Valladolid, I had the privilege and the honor of meeting the 10th descendant of Christopher Columbus during the unveil of a plaque commemoration of the 420th anniversary of the death of Red Hugh O'Donnell. Well, as you may understand, when Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, the Spanish rulers were anxious to secure their new territories from their rivals, the Portuguese. So the Pope, Alexander VI, he was a Spaniard, drew a north to south line across the globe where he wanted to divide the land for the Portuguese and the Spanish. All lands east from that line would be claimed by the Portuguese, all the lands west would be claimed by the Spanish. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed after Spain had agreed to move the line further west from the blue line to the red line, as you can see there. That new border, that new boundary allowed the Portuguese to claim Brazil, discovered in 1500 by Pedro Álvares Cabral. So the Treaty of Tordesillas divided the world between the two superpowers of the era of that time. Needless to say, none of the other European states with a seaboard accepted this treaty, like the Dutch, the English, or the French. From then on, the Portuguese to the west colonized what now is Brazil, and kept on sailing to the east, reaching as far as Oman, Malacca, Timor, China, Japan, and settled in Macau in 1557. Meanwhile, to the west, the Spanish expanded its power to the west, and by 1530, they controlled the Caribbean islands, most of South and Central America, including Western North America. Both countries expanded their sphere of influence all around the world. Long voyages were only possible because they had to learn how to study, invent, and adapt to seas, tides, winds, weather conditions, new techniques of negotiation with other people, harsh environments, battle strategies, and all sorts of changing situations. This was also possible because bigger and stronger ships were designed, better and more powerful and reliable weapons were forged, men were trained to improve their navigation skills, tools were invented, and new cooking and preservation techniques were tested so they could make fresh food last longer during sea voyages. Well, by the 1570s, Portugal was ruled by Dom Sebastião, a young bachelor king that was not married, had no offspring, and was reluctant on listening to his close advisors. On the other hand, in Spain, Spain was ruled by Philip II, who was older, intelligent, wily, cautious, and experienced. However, as far as we are concerned, for what we want to talk about here in this presentation, is that Philip II was an uncle of Dom Sebastião. They belong to the same bloodline from Dom Manuel I. So in 1576, at the monastery of Guadalupe in Cáceres, both kings, uncle and nephew, they gathered for the first and only time. The Portuguese king brought two requests to his uncle. First, he wanted military help to a campaign in Morocco against the Muslims. And second, he wanted the hand in marriage from his first-born daughter, Infanta Dona Isabella. Philip refused both. So the Battle of Alcácer Quibir in Africa in 1578 resulted in a disaster, a complete disaster for the Portuguese. King Sebastian disappeared, his body never found, and he leaves no direct descendants. The Portugal kingdom loses more than a king. From then on, it opens a dynastic crisis of succession for the kingdom's crown. Ultimately, it will lead Portugal to become part of the Spanish Empire. That crisis would last for 2 years and 7 pretenders to the throne. Philip II, strongly believing he was the right heir, the legitimate heir to the crown, decided to invade Portugal in 1580 with a Spanish army of 40,000 men that invaded Portugal under the command of Duke de Alba, supported by the navy, supported by Marquis de Santa Cruz. In August 1580, the Battle of Alcântara resulted in a complete and decisive victory for the Spanish, both on land and sea. Then, in 1583, finally the Azores are conquered by Marquis de Santa Cruz. In March 1581, the slides are not on the correct order. I have to come here. King Philip II of Spain is crowned as Philip I of Portugal. He agrees, however, to Portugal to remain independent and completely autonomous on his administrations, so he creates one kingdom, two crowns. Now, yes, let's go here. Well, the situation in Europe at that time was delicate both politically and religiously. Great division between the faiths of Catholic and Protestants. Queen Elizabeth supported the Dutch rebellion in Flanders, and also the open support of Elizabeth to privateers and pirates, such as John Hawkins or Sir Francis Drake, that were targeting Spanish ships that were coming from the New World, that caused great distress and troubles to the Spanish monarchy and economy. After the Azores, Santa Cruz suggested to deploy an armada against England, convinced that defeating England had a real possibility of success. That way, they would overthrow Elizabeth and restore the Catholic faith in England. In response to all those tensions, King Philip eventually decided to evade and launch an invasion of England. As Portugal had become part of the Spanish Empire, it became the focal point to prepare the whole Armada for several reasons. Its strategic location on the western coast of Portugal, with a direct and easy way to the Atlantic, that would facilitate the movement of ships and supplies. On the other hand, Lisbon has a vast natural harbor, easy to protect and defend from attacks, both from land or sea, and also it is well sheltered from the elements. Another advantage of Lisbon is the fact that, due to the whole navigation history, it has a lot of well-established shipyards for constructing and maintaining warships. It is capable of supplying food, water, ammunition, and other essential supplies to the Armada. In June 1584, King Philip appointed Santa Cruz as Captain General of all oceans. The Spanish fleet, King Philip and Santa Cruz knew that the Spanish fleet was not enough to launch such a major enterprise against England. So he only decided to go forward in 1586 when two objectives were attained. For one, he needed to have a secure harbor in northern France or in Flanders, and he had to be sure that the Portuguese galleons were ready to be part of this campaign. One thing we have to keep in mind is the huge complexity and the logistics and the preparation required to launch such a campaign. The shipyards, the artillery foundries for the guns, the barracks to hold and house so many soldiers that were gathering in Lisbon. So all this kind of logistics and preparation was very important. For the last but not the least, the finances. Keeping the fleet in Lisbon was costing something like 70 to 80% of the incomes of the crown. So King Philip wanted to launch as soon as possible, not only for political reasons, but also for financial reasons. Although he wanted the fleet to set sail in 1587, several delays and setbacks appeared, so it took 2 years so he could deploy the Armada. The lightning attacks of Drake to Cadiz, Lisbon, Algarve, and Azores were causing a lot of distress on the crown, and he was causing troubles on the whole supplying of the ships. Epidemics, diseases, several diseases occurred in Lisbon that caused also a big impact on the whole process of supplying and provisioning the ships. And finally, also the death of Santa Cruz that was succeeded by Medina Sidonia. He died of typhus in February 88, and a few days later, Medina Sidonia is appointed by King Philip. He tries to refuse this invitation, but to no avail. He had to go forward and to lead the preparation and the setting sail to be the leader of the invasion. Santa Cruz was a great leader with a lot of experience, but Medina Sidonia didn't have any military experience, although he was often recognized for his capabilities of organization and administrative capabilities. So the truth is, he was appointed in February, and in April, the whole fleet was ready to set sail. Regarding the fleet, in 1586, King Philip commissioned 130 ships, as we all know. The goal was to transport 30,000 men across the English Channel and invade England. Only around 30 to 35 ships were considered real fighting ships. They were warships. Most of the private vessels in the Armada were built for Mediterranean conditions, not even remotely prepared for the North Sea. And this is crucial. The Armada primary brief was to transport troops gathered in Lisbon and escort them to Flanders. They would be placed under the command of Duke of Parma, joining his own troops in Flanders, cross the English Channel and invade England. It was never meant to be a combat fleet to engage the English Navy on a full-scale naval conflict. The Armada consisted of a large fleet composed with ships from very different types. Most of them no more than merchant ships, some of which were armed, but without real fire and combat capability. Those were to be escorted by the warships, of which the Portuguese galleons stood out. The ships were grouped in various divisions called the squadrons. The squadrons that were organized for logistical reasons only, according to the geographic regions from where they came from, or by types of ships. Here, there is something that I think it's important to say, is that all the squadron leaders, the commanders, were all experienced, and they were capable, and they were experienced sailors and combatants. However, they were all Spanish. Reminding that Portugal was part of the Spanish Empire only for 8 years, as the ships set sail in 88, and only in 1580 Portugal became part of the Spanish Empire. Having Spanish commanders and Portuguese crews on the same ships caused two kinds of problems. For one side, they were not used to be under Spanish command, so there was some resistance on that. On the other hand, the difference in languages caused some disruption on understanding the orders that were issued. The English never did this mistake. The loyalty of the crews and were of the same nationality as their commanders. So the crews that were composed of 3 groups of men. They were the sailors to maneuver the ships, the soldier to fight after landing in England, and other staff like surgeons, servants, cooks, and other auxiliary personnel. Differences between the Portuguese and the Spanish on the composition of the crews and supplies have another thing that must be said. The Portuguese always had on their ships, they carried their own pharmacies and medical staff. The Spanish usually had auxiliary ships with the medical products, the surgeons, etc. So when on sea someone needed any help, there would be a vessel coming back and forth from those medical ships to the ships that had people who needed. So this difference of preparation of the crews could cause some kind of problems afterwards. From all those squadrons, the squadron of Portugal was the main squadron of warships. It had 12 ships, 9 galleons from Portugal, a galleon from Florence, and 2 zebras that in fact were not small galleons. They were not zebras as the other zebras from the fleet. They were to transport something like more than 1,200 men, sailors, and 3,000 troops. For all intents and purposes, this squadron were the main warships of the whole Armada. Ooh. Let's jump here a bit. So this is just a few information about the firepower of the Portuguese galleons. During the campaign, when they set sail to England, they had the first problems with the weather and the first storm in the Biscaya Gulf. So they had to stop in La Coruña to refuel and to have treated a lot of people that were already sick. Because of that weather problems, those were weather problems, a lot of ships, 28 of them, failed to shelter on time and suffered all sorts of damages, including the Portuguese galleon São Luís. They took about 6 weeks to sail again to England. That took a week-long voyage with more bad weather, new problems on ships and damages caused by the bad weather, not prepared to the North Sea. Squadron Naples returned home, and the fleet dispersed again, but regrouped in sight of Cape Lizard. In Plymouth, the tides trapped most of the English fleet. It was a golden opportunity for the Spanish to block, attack, and blast it away, but Medina Sidonia chose not to attack. Next morning, the opportunity was gone. The English escaped with 54 ships. So a few days later, during 2 days, the English and the Spanish Armada maneuvered to get the best possible positions. On July the 31st, the first combats took place that lasted for 7 hours. For 5 days, the fleet engaged in heavily fighting. The Portuguese galleons were consistently in the thick of the action, regularly maneuvering to where the combat was heaviest, engaging the English ships to fight with them, getting repeatedly hit and fighting back. For example, the galleon St. John, commanded by Recalde, a great commander, kept on sailing on the rear of the fleet in defense to defend all the other ships of the Armada. Other squadrons, more vulnerable and less prepared for the real fight, could sail and keep safe up north. On other times, they were chasing the English ships, putting themselves into harm's way to save other ships under attack, escorting them to safety amidst the rest of the fleet. Despite several combats, the Armada never broke the defensive crescent-shaped formation and got closer to the French coast near Flanders. The rigid discipline and brave action of the warships contributed to the low number of losses and injuries to personnel. They arrived to France, and the casualties was less than 2% across the fleet. They had 360 dead, around 100 injured, and 2 ships were captured by Drake himself from the squadron Andalusia. Arriving to Calais, the Armada reached Calais on August the 6th, virtually unscattered. The anchorage of the coast of Calais was not ideal because of the exposure to attacks. Nevertheless, it served as a gathering point for the Armada with the Duke of Parma's troops. That was not yet ready and needed 2 more weeks. So 2 days later, after midnight, sacrificing 8 small ships, the English attacked using the fire ships that aimed at the tightly clustered Spanish ships. The Spanish ships tried their best to maneuver and escape. Most of ships chose to sacrifice their anchors. That decision they would later desperately regret, as they were left vulnerable against storms. The impact was not decisive, but it dispersed the fleet ships, and some isolated ships got vulnerable to further attacks. Almost finished. The Spanish Armada presence in Calais was short-lived. Following the attack of the fire ships, the Battle of Gravelines started. Once more, the galleons proved their worth, playing a critical role in preventing the English attack on the rest of the Armada. For 2 hours, 5 Portuguese galleons engaged in rearguard action against several enemy ships. The aim was to allow them to regroup, resume formation, and to escape attack. The galleons were heavily hit with short-range gunners on both sides of the ship at the same time. The Saint-Philippe fought against 16 English ships at the same time, and São Mateus against 10. The Portuguese squadron kept to the rear despite regular attacks by the whole English fleet, now reinforced by Lord Howard's and Seymour's vessels. The São Martinho, the flagship of the Armada, took heavy fire with 200 shots on the side. The rest of the ships that kept on fighting suffered 600 kills and 800 wounded. The Armada headed to the North Sea, always trying to avoid the shallows and the sandbanks. Heroism always takes its toll, and they paid dearly for their bravery. 2 of the galleons, Saint-Philippe and São Mateus, ended up badly damaged and running aground off Newport in Flemish shore. They were attacked by Dutch ships. Regarding Saint-Philippe, the crew managed to leave the ship and joined with the Duke of Parma's forces on land. Less fortunate was the São Mateus, with no armor left, with most of the crew dead or injured. After a 6-hour fight, they had no choice but to surrender. All men on board, but the officers, were swiftly killed on the spot. Both ships were captured and taken by the Dutch. The danger of wrecking had passed, but most of the warships were damaged. They had less than half of the ammunition left. Almost all the ships were running low on food and supplies. So the Armada commanders decided to return to La Coruña, sailing around the British Isles. The mission to invade England was impossible to accomplish. After the Battle of Gravelines, the ill-fated returned back to the port of La Coruña. The Armada was severely damaged because of the engagement and unfavorable weather conditions, and the shortage of supplies. The return voyage was difficult and dangerous due to the weather conditions, treacherous coastlines, and they had to navigate through unfamiliar waters. Efforts were made to regroup and consolidate the fleet, but the weather got worse and worse, and it got scattered once again. Severe damages was caused to the ships because of the lack of anchors and the inability to take shelter and hove. So disastrous outcome was dozens of ships were lost and shipwrecked, great loss of lives by the thousands. Just one more thing here. The Portuguese galleon São Marcos even had ropes around its keel to try to keep it together. It's impressive. It shipwrecked on the reefs of Mutton Island on the coast of County Clare. Finally, the Armada eventually returned to Spain. Half of the ships were gone. Three quarters of its souls were lost too. Over 18,000 sailors and soldiers died, some in battle, most of them drowned during the shipwrecks, and the survivors killed by the English. From the initial 130 ships that sailed from Lisbon, only 67 returned to Coruña, and approximately 26 of them shipwrecked on the coast of Ireland due to the storms. In spite of all propaganda and misinformation printed on common knowledge, the truth of the matter is that more than any English action, the weather was the worst and most persistent enemy of the Spanish Armada during the whole journey. The Armada lost far more ships and men wrecked off Ireland's coast than in battle with the English fleet. Many more lost their lives to drowning, hunger, disease, and the cold than to actual combat. Despite the fate of the Armada in Ireland, the late 16th century saw a strong bond created between the Irish and the Spanish that prevails to this day. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pedro. And we have an entire other presentation from Pedro's that we'll do some other time on the flight of the Earls and the O'Donnells in Spain and Portugal. Yeah, well, look, at what we're going to do is we're so tight on time, unfortunately, and we have other speakers and we have a whole pile of events taking place this afternoon as well. But Pedro, I appreciate your time and your input here. But we are going to take a coffee break now, so if people have an interest in that particular story, you can get Pedro into the corner and sit him down and get 5 minutes where he'll give you all of that information. Yeah. And then just to give you a couple of other notes before we take a break. One is that, as you can see from the cameras, all of the lectures today are being streamed live on both Facebook and YouTube. You can visit www.SpanishArmadaIreland.com. If you want to look back at yesterday's lectures, they're all there. So you can watch them all back. And similarly, when the lectures are completed today, they'll also be visible. If you missed any of the slides or missed any of the presentations, you can watch them all back there as well. I just draw your attention as well to a couple of publications. So over in the corner here, you'll see beside the coffee, you've got a number of publications. Amongst them, this publication, which was produced in relation to the Streige Armada Rex, and it's a wonderful production. You can take a copy with you. There aren't that many copies there, but you can take one if you can find one. And also other publications that have been delivered to us here by some of our colleagues who are taking part in the conference here this morning. I just as well want to draw your attention to this programme. You would have probably received a copy of our souvenir programme. You're welcome to take that home with you today. There are lots of interesting articles and items in here, and among them I just want to draw your attention to one on page 9, this beautiful piece of artwork which has been recently completed by artist Diarmuid Delargy, who's down at the back. You might just stand up a second, Diarmuid, so we can see who you are. Okay, so a beautiful representation of the Spanish Armada at Streige, and I'm sure if anybody has any interest in it, Diarmuid would be happy to talk to you about the work that he has created here. Just very finally, before we break, I just want to mention... Okay, I know one person who's not getting coffee. Thank you, Declan. So just a couple of people, we are, as I mentioned, being streamed, and people are watching in from all sorts of curious places. So we have Spain, and we have Ireland, and we have England, and we have somebody watching in Thailand as well. So you're all very welcome, and you might text people if they are abroad, or drop a note to people to let them know that we are streaming until 1 o'clock this afternoon if they want to tune in. Two people who aren't here, who I know would love to be here, and they're wonderful supporters of our event that takes place every September, and again is repeated with between the 15th and 17th of September, remembering the Armada, our annual commemoration that takes place at Streige. And they're Justo Jimeno Bazaga and Joaquin Estade Seco, who are two of our great benefactors who, along with Pedro Luis Chinchilla, who is here this afternoon and who spoke yesterday, have been wonderful supporters of ours down the years, and we just wanted to give them a big mention, and you might give them all a round of applause as well. Thank you. And to many others from Spain and Ireland who also contribute so generously to our efforts. While we're having our coffee break, You'll have seen the diorama which was produced for the conference, which is over in the corner here, a beautiful piece of art which was commissioned by the conference, by TIDE and by Spanish Armada Ireland. It indicates where the wreck site lies at Streeja. It's an artistic impression, and it was created by Nathan Wheeler and Dave Flynn, both of whom are in the room. They're going to get a microphone, and anybody who's interested and wants to find out a little bit, bring your coffee up. The lads will chat to you over the course of the 10 minutes or 15 minutes that we're taking coffee. If you want to do something else, that's up to yourselves as well, or if you were here yesterday, you might have heard that presentation. So help yourselves. Coffee is self-service, and we'll be back with you again shortly for part 2. Thank you.
We settled? Ready? Yeah. Guys, you're all very welcome now to the post-coffee break session. You're all rejuvenated, ready to go. Thank you. We've had some fantastic speakers so far, and we're going to have more now. But during the coffee break, you know, a little birdie came up to me, and I heard a little story. Somebody's birthday is in here today. Somebody's birthday. Anybody want to put their love of Suez? Anyone put their hand up for whose birthday it might be? Finbar Moore. Happy birthday to Finbar Moore. So, happy birthday. Okay. So hopefully you're suitably embarrassed now, Finbar. So welcome back now to a fascinating theme which brings us to the coastal fringes of County Mayo and a most recognisable name in verse, song and story, that of Gráinne Whale, Gráinne O'Malley, better known as Gráinne Whale, a clan leader in a male-dominated landscape in the late 16th century. To tell her story, please welcome Dr. Connie Kelleher.
Thank you very much. And firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me here to the Spanish Armada TIDE Conference. It's a privilege and I'm honoured, particularly to what we now consider our friends up here in Spanish Armada, Ireland. It's always great to get up here, and any excuse, and we're up here, the three of us, to support it and to meet everybody. So in lovely Sligo. What I'm going to talk about today is Grace O'Malley, but not specific to her as a pirate queen. It's really to put her, or try to put her, in the context of her maritime Gaelic cultural landscape. Okay, so I'll move on quickly. Now, I suppose we're all familiar with Grace O'Malley, or most of us are anyway. She has many names through the ages, both in contemporary sources and also in kind of song and verse and poetry and mythology and folklore. And you can see a selection of them listed there. She's also been invariably referred to as the Pirate Queen. In contemporary sources, she's referred to as the famous feminine sea captain, and she also, of course, was referred to as a notorious traitoress by the English crown. What we do know of her is that she was born in about the 1530s. She came from an Irish maritime or Gaelic maritime background in West Connacht, born into a seafaring family, the O'Malleys. So she had an understanding and a familiarity with boats and ships and the coastal landscape from the day she was born. It was very much a patriarchal society, so male-dominated, as you can imagine, with those that had ships and the Gaelic lordships in general. Her maritime career spanned 40 years, which is an extremely long maritime career for anyone, particularly a woman. And she died in 1603, the same year that Queen Elizabeth I died. As I say, there's been much written about her. The seminal work remains. And here you see the 40th anniversary edition of Grace O'Malley by Anne Chambers. And that is the definitive work, historical work on Grace O'Malley. And it's been updated for the 40th anniversary. And if you haven't read about Grace O'Malley, that's the book to read. From a piracy perspective, and very much a more recent publication is by John Appleby in the context of women and piracy and female agency during the time of the Tudors. He includes talking about Grace O'Malley in that and places the piracy of the time within its context. So another essential read on women and piracy during that period. But of course, from very early on, we have poems and songs written about her. And here's just an excerpt from a 15th century poem that says, "They are the lions of the green sea, men acquainted with the land of Spain. when seizing cattle from Kintyre in Scotland, a mile by sea is short for the O'Malleys. So we instantly get a sense that not only are they maritime sea lords, but they're also familiar with the coast around them, with Scotland, with the Northern Isles, but also with the continent, and that's back in the 1400s, as you would. No great surprise, really, for a seafaring family. But just to put the O'Malley Gaelic lordships in the context of the general Gaelic maritime Ireland at the time in the late and post-medieval periods. Generally from the 14th or the 12th to the 14th century, we see a general emergence, or what should be probably more appropriately called a re-emergence of maritime Gaelic lordships along the western fringes of Ireland and the southwest and the northwest. Many of them had been pushed out of their lands in the internal lands with the incursion of the Anglo-Normans. So they were pushed west and southwest and northwest indeed. Economically, at the time, fish was the trade of choice, because such was the wealth of the resource in our territorial waters that it was not only for internal consumption but also international consumption. And we also see during that period, particularly from the 1400s, but particularly into the 1500s, the opening up of exploration and Atlantic voyages across to the places like the New World and North and South America. We also see the building of coastal tower houses beginning in the 15th century. So the landscape changes from very much a Gaelic wooden structures to stone structures. So these become dominant features in the landscape and along our coasts by the Gaelic lordships. Again, borrowing from what they had seen and what they had learned from the Anglo-Norman lords. It was a semi-feudal society. The Gaelic lords exacted dues or fees for the use of their waters, and I'll go into that a bit more later on. And that's how they got a lot of their wealth, not just through direct trade, but indirect trade by essentially exploiting those who are exploiting the resources along their coastlines. Not all Gaelic lords had specific maritime capabilities in Ireland. Some of them had, and I'll put up a list in a minute, but those that didn't necessarily have ships but had coastal lordships would also have resources that they could exploit, such as anchorages. So they might charge for the use of their waters for ships to anchor. So while they didn't specifically have ships, they would have garnered some wealth from charging for the use of their anchorages. There was ongoing internecine warfare between the Gaelic lords, and we see this throughout the history of the Gaelic lords. So they would fight with each other and they'd raid each other. And we see the O'Malleys raiding other Gaelic lords in Donegal and as far south as Kerry. And again, over to Scotland as well. So very much in a way, a fickle loyalties where your lordship was foremost, and protection of that and expansion of that was really the goal. The potential of the Irish harbours was noted from a very early time. In 1553, Philip I of Spain, you can see there, agreed to pay £1,000 per year for 21 years to ensure that his subjects could fish along the Irish coast. And I just wanted to drill down into that a little bit through the National Archives currency converter. If you've ever used that, it'll take you back to the time period and you can convert the currency into today's money. But £1,000 at the time would buy you 210 horses, 800 cows, 3,125 stone of wool, over 1,000 quarts of wheat, and equivalent in days of skilled labour to 33,333 days. In today's money, in sterling, it would be equivalent to almost £275,000 sterling, or in euros, 316,000 euros. So it was an enormous amount to actually be prepared to pay in order to fish in our waters. Such was the richness of the fish at the time, and this was also payment to the Gaelic lords for the use of their waters. So that gives you an idea of the liaisons that were going on financially. From the harbours, I won't go through these all, but you can see there that the harbours were also noted by the English crown and the value of the harbours in Ireland. From in the northern part of the country at the time, from Carrickfergus all the way to Donegal, it stated that the Scots have their influence and the Bretons have their influence, and they furnish O'Donnell, the Gaelic lord up there, O'Donnell of the Fish as he was known, wine, salt, iron and munitions for war, and guns and powder for the use of their harbour. From Limerick, from there to Limerick, the Spaniards and the Bretons have the trade, and few or no Englishmen come there, but only into Galway. So we begin to build up an idea of who's frequenting and coming into the waters of the Gaelic lordships. From Limerick to Cork, the Spaniards and the Bretons again are the ones most frequenting the waters there, and they in turn are again supplying the Gaelic lords there with salt, iron, guns and powder. And it was noted at the time by Anthony St. Leger to Henry VIII, the king, the havens, if they were in your majesty's hands, it should not only be to your realm's great profit, and he highlights specifically the fishing, with the same on hides, but also a great weakening of Irishmen. So it's identified that this is a way to weaken the Gaelic lordships. As I say, trade and wealth, just to give you an example, fishing was the predominant catch of the day. The O'Malleys as well as the O'Driscolls in the south charged for their fleets, everything to do with the fleets, not just coming into the water, not just anchorages, but also for even drying the fish on rocks. And this is spelled out very clearly to do with the O'Driscolls. Again, I won't read all of this, but it'll give you an idea of the wealth that was coming into just one Gaelic lord from ships coming in. And this was individual fishermen. This was on top of what Philip was prepared to pay for 21 years annually. Every ship or boat that fishes there is to pay the lord in money, 16 shillings and 2 pence, a barrel of flour, a barrel of salt, a hogshead of beer, a dish of fish 3 times a week from every boat, and if they dried their fish in any part of the said country, to pay 13 shillings for the rocks. If the crew of the ship in the harbour were to revictual, the O'Driscolls were entitled for every beef they kill, they are to pay 8 pence, and for every sheep and pig, likewise 1 penny to the lord. So that every boat that is let into the harbour to fishermen, that the lord is to have of the latter 6 shillings and 8 pence for every 100 whitefish and every barrel of herrings or fish pilchard. So you can see that the lords themselves didn't actually have to go out and do any fishing because they were supplied with all of this at the time. The main Gaelic lords then, among them were the O'Donnells of Donegal, as I say, the O'Donnells of the Fish, the O'Malleys of Mayo, the O'Flahertys of Mayo and Galway, very much linked into the O'Malleys by marriage of Grace O'Malley, the O'Sullivan Bearers of Cork, and the O'Driscolls of Cork as well. It's interesting as well to note that the one manuscript, a description of the power of Irishmen as part of the Cottonian manuscript in the British Library, only lists 2 lords. It lists all the power of the Gaelic Irishmen or the Gaelic lords, but it only refers to 2 of them, the O'Driscolls and the O'Malleys, as having galleys. And you can see it here. You can see here it states with O'Driscoll in Desmond, which is Munster, who use long galleys, and in Connacht, the O'Malleys, who use long galleys. Now, we do know that others had ships. The O'Flahertys had ships, and the O'Sullivan Bearers had ships particularly. And we can say that definitively because here's a contemporary map of 1558, and the O'Sullivan Bearer galleys are shown in that. But it's curious that the source on the power of Irishmen only names those 2 Gaelic families. So we can look at the Gaelic lordships and Grace O'Malley within the context of that, and we can look at the commonalities or the similar traits or trends within those. Each one would have its own, obviously each lordship would have its own individual variables in its culture and society and power and political influence, and particularly in its economic influence. But from a military, from a maritime perspective, the sources very much kind of show a common trend as well. And this is borne out by recent studies, particularly by Colin Breen and John Raven in their recent studies of Gaelic lordships. So looking at the two clans in particular, I chose to look at just the two of them, the O'Malleys in the northwest and the O'Driscolls in the south in Munster. Both of their territories, they were coastal, they were rural, they were remote, they were rugged, and they contained what we would regard as an archipelago. The O'Malleys controlled the land and waters of the Iwala, which includes modern baronies of, or equates to the modern baronies of Burrisahole and Murrisk, and includes the islands of Achill, Turk and Inishbofin, and all the islands within Clew Bay. And here you see this contemporary map showing Granuaile. Here she is here, Granny O'Malley. And this is all the islands along the coast there, including representations in Clew Bay with Clare Island indicated specifically. And just a list of just some of the islands in Clew Bay and its immediate environs. Very much an archipelago. It is said traditionally to have 365 islands, one for every day of the day of the year. 101 of them have names. But you can see here just this photograph by local photographer Edward Reid, the actual sheer archipelagic landscape that we're looking at. The O'Driscolls, down the south. Here's a contemporary map from 1589. This is the O'Driscoll lordship here, and you can see it's a bit faded there, but Inisharkin, Cape Clear is there, and the little islands are represented in what's called Roaring Water Bay. And again, from basically Castlehaven all the way to Ahadown in Roaring Water Bay. This too is an archipelago. And again, these are the main islands in Roaring Water Bay listed here. And it is represented on a 1612 map, a Dutch map, that was specific to ridding the harbours of that area of pirates, the later pirates of the early 17th century. But they show clearly the many islands, which has lended its name to Carbery of the 100 Islands. This is known as West Carbery and Carbery of the 100 Isles. So you begin to see the similarities between the two landscapes. And these landscapes, the kind of archipelagos, ensured that there was an interconnectivity and an interactivity between what was going on there, but it also very much facilitated indigenous amphibious piracy or coastal raiding, which was a tradition of the Gaelic Irish lords. Those writing about them and those affected by it called it piracy. I dare say the lordships themselves saw it as a tradition of protecting their landscapes and their coastal waters. But the concept of these islands as choke points or staging areas is not unique to Ireland. It's a study that's been taken across the world, and talking to Colin last night over dinner and Paula, it's very much the same in Scotland, for instance. So it's this landscape that affords an opportune territory to ships, smaller, more manoeuvrable ships, to sail in and out of around the islands, to use them as staging points where they can attack larger passing ships and then escape very easily. The narrows, for instance, between islands and headlands is another one. And this is even the case today, where in modern day piracy, areas like the Straits of Malacca, in Singapore and Malaysia and the Gulf of Guinea, the pirates use narrows and staging points for their piracy. So it's utilization of the landscape that affords you that. I suppose, as I said earlier, the most obvious similarities are the fortifications between the Gaelic maritime lords. And So these are just the castles. I won't go through all of them. I just put up a selection. These are O'Malley castles, inherited from the O'Flahertys and the Burkes through intermarriage of Grace, first with the O'Flahertys and then the Burkes. And what was incredible was that she was accepted as the leader of those clans eventually by the actual clans themselves, when her first husband was accused of murder and her second husband died. So she became leader of the clans then, which was the striking part of that. And she inherited, the O'Malleys had their own castles, but she also inherited castles. The O'Driscolls had 25 castles. Again, this is just a selection. Duna Shade in Baltimore was their main castle, and they had other coastal castles around the place. And again, they had one inland castle that denoted where their extent of their territory originally, but then they were pushed down towards the coast. Very much strategically located, many of them. Not all per se to do with controlling their waters, because some of them, like Clare Island Castle, for instance, doesn't command Clew Bay extensively. So it possibly was used as an administrative centre, but there's also, as identified by Anne Chambers, the possibility that she had her summer residence on Clare Island. And again, there's a similarity there between the O'Driscolls. We know that the O'Driscolls in Cloughan Castle, which is in an idyllic situation in Lochine, which is our marine nature reserve lake down in West Cork, had their summer residence there. So you can imagine that at some stage the lords just wanted to go, and their families and their wives particularly, wanted to go and have a bit of peace and just hang out in the sunshine in some castle where they could enjoy it. So possibly using them for that. Raiding. Certainly there's records of raiding to do with both O'Driscoll lords. Extensive raiding, which obviously lent the infamy, I suppose, to Grace afterwards as the famous pirate queen. The early raids of Grace herself was on Galway Harbour. The merchants of Galway had refused to deal with the Gaelic lords, so the maritime lords, the O'Flaherty and the O'Malleys, would raid the ships going in and out, and that's noted in the sources. And the annals have many references to Grace O'Malley and her ships along the coast, as I say, all the way from Donegal to Kerry. She also raided castles, like Renville Castle, which she took for her own, and she also raided and landed on islands, such as Innisboffin. And her tactic there was that she would also capture the local boats and ships while she was there, and thus preventing anybody else from actually coming on shore. She was also noted in Scottish waters, not only for raiding, but also for trading. And one of those trading ventures was that she would offer her galleys to import the Scottish mercenaries or gallowglasses into Ireland, which then the Gaelic lords used as their own mercenaries to augment their own fighting force. So she traded back and forth along the northern waters as well. The O'Driscolls too are noted from a very early period as menaces to merchant shipping, and the need to fight with God's assistance the nation of O'Driscolls, who constantly remain upon the Western Ocean preying on passing ships. So again, very much part of coastal raiding and indigenous amphibious raiding going on between the two Gaelic lords. They were also, by the looks of it, hired as mercenaries by other Gaelic lordships, not necessarily Gaelic lordships. The De Poers, which were descendants from the Anglo-Normans of Waterford, hired them to attack the city of Waterford at one stage. Mind you, it had their comeuppance because they were in turn attacked by the men of Waterford, and it was during one of those attacks in 1641 that during a raid on Tramore that their 3 galleys were captured, and they can be seen on the seal of Waterford and indeed the seal of Waterford Council ever since. Do we have evidence for galleys, which in one way set the Gaelic maritime lords apart? No, not really. Very sparse. They're extremely elusive. We have documentary evidence. We have depictions, as we see here. These are representation of the 3 O'Driscoll galleys on the 1556 charter of William and Mary. And we know from the sources that Grace O'Malley's son had three large galleys that could carry 300 men apiece, and how valuable they were. And we have representations on the armorial plaque on Grace O'Malley's tomb. Archaeologically, very, very little. And again, Colin and Paula and Dave and myself were talking about this last night. There's only very literally fragmentary remains of possible ship timbers from a couple of the locks in Scotland. But that's it. They remain the elusive shipwreck that we're all trying to find. What set her apart? Well, I've only skirted on and looked at some of the similarities between the Gaelic lords and the O'Malleys and the O'Driscolls in particular. But what set Grace apart? Well, I suppose the most obvious one was that she's a woman in a man's world, very much a patrilineal society at the time, referred to as Der Finne, where the successors were chosen from the clan. And as I say, remarkably, Grace was chosen eventually by the clan of the O'Malleys, the O'Flahertys and the Burkes to lead them as their Gaelic leader. And it was in that role as commander of her ships, the crews and the clans as a female Gaelic lord that she broke traditional boundaries. And that's where that's where she's really set apart. She was a female Gaelic leader, which was fairly unique. I don't think there's any other that we know of. We hear mention of wives of Gaelic lords, such as the O'Driscoll's wife going to Mass and his family attending Mass with them at one stage. But we have no real female Gaelic leader apart from her. And she held her own with contemporaries of the time. Thanks, Declan. On both sides of the Atlantic and the Irish Sea. Here we see Sir Henry Sidney writing to Walsingham. He was Lord Deputy of Ireland at the time, describing his meeting with Grace O'Malley, or Granny O'Malley, as he put it. And it's here that it's mentioned the most famous feminine sea captain. And in fact, he underlines it, because such was the uniqueness of the fact that she was a female sea captain. And she went, and where she went, her crew and her clan followed. She was clever. She was very clever. And she did what a lot of others did. She also made petitions. She fought the crown, but behind it, she also liaised with the crown, because in order to keep her lands, that's what you needed to do. Here's just a copy of a petition that she sent to Queen Elizabeth, requesting fairness in how she was being treated by the governor of Connacht at the time, Richard Bingham, who was known for his brutality. And he was capturing her ships, and he was capturing even her cows, to try to break her. And she wrote to the Queen, and she actually went a step further, and she went to the Queen to make representation to her. And it took a couple of months. She sailed up the river of the Thames in her boat with reputedly 3 of her crew, and spent a couple of months waiting for an audience, in particular for the release of her son, which Bingham had taken prisoner. Here you see a famous representation of that meeting from the Bridgeman Art Collection in the British Library. They say that she walked in with bare feet, and when Elizabeth seemingly offered her, when she was going to sneeze, a handkerchief, she took the handkerchief and then threw it into the fire. And when Elizabeth said, "Oh, I would have put it up my sleeve and saved it for later," she said that, "Well, we have a higher value on hygiene in Ireland." Now that's myth, but seemingly, and again, Anne Chambers writes about this. I had to put up the Sligo-based artist Annie West's vision of Gráinne Wales meeting with Elizabeth, and it wasn't over handkerchiefs, it was drinking pints. So if you have not seen Annie West's work, she's brilliant. But there were contemporaries of her, female contemporaries too, that that also made representations and were leaders in their field, not Gaelic rulers, but contemporary, behind-the-scene rulers almost. Eleanor, Countess of Desmond, was one of those. And again, Anne Chambers has written about her and highlighted her. She, again, petitioned Queen Elizabeth on behalf of her husband, who had escaped, but she was assuring Elizabeth that it was not against the crown. It was just so he could return to his lands and be a loyal subject. And Eleanor, just again, a Sligo connection. Most of you may know this, but she's buried in Sligo Abbey here in Sligo. At the same time in 1593 that she was petitioning and visiting Queen Elizabeth, she had also visited the lords in Ulster. And here she goes, running with the hares and running with the hounds. She met with Hugh O'Neill and Hugh Dove O'Donnell in Ulster to talk uprising and to hear about their plans for the uprising in the Desmond Wars and later in 1601. There too was Fionnuala, the wife of O'Donnell, and she was the daughter of the Lord of the Isles, James MacDonald. So here was a direct link to the court of Scotland. She, in her turn, was known as Ineen Dove O'Donnell, Fionnuala, and she was a formidable force in her own right, brutal, not opposed to killing when she needed to, and she was effectively leading the O'Donnells when Hugh Dove became senile, because he was much older. So I suppose a behind-the-scenes female Gaelic leader there, perhaps. She was also, and here's a Spanish link, apart from the Battle of Kinsale, Reggie O'Donnell was her son, and in 2022 a plaque was erected to him in Valladolid where he was buried, commemorating his burial there. So, last slide, Declan. There are many embellishments about Granuaile, and I could go on forever talking about her, but a lot of folk tales, lots of poems, and here we see one here from written, it's a part of the 1831 Hardiman minstrelsy. She has strongholds on her headlands and brave galleys on the sea, and no warlike chief or Viking ever had a bolder heart than she. So very much in later times brought to the fore as a kind of this infamous pirate queen and almost superhuman female. But there are a lot of mistruths about her, and it's trying to get down to the facts of where Granuaile fitted in, really. The one thing that we can say for sure is that she was very much an extraordinary female Gaelic ruler of her time. What sets her apart, I suppose, is that she had contemporaries, but she stood out as the only female ruler of Gaelic lordship, and also as female sea captain. And I suppose just this very quick overview of the Gaelic maritime lordships in which she operated is really the best way, I think anyway, to understand Grace O'Malley within that maritime context. And from there we can see where all the myth and the legend comes from. But her real contribution and her most remarkable feat is that she was a female in a man's world at a time when it was unheard of at that stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie. At the heart of the TIDE project has been the use of virtual reality to tell stories in a way that enhances the visitor's experience, in a way that is changing the landscape in how we retell our history. Now to the man who led the Clarta team of designers to outline the work undertaken, the technology involved, and the impressive results, Lionel Dominion.
Thank you. So, hi, my name is Lionel Domanjon, and I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity that is given to me to talk about virtual heritage and some of the achievements we have done in the TIDE project. Yes, here's here. Okay, let's start. First, I have to say I work for a company that is named Clarté, and Clarté is a technical center, research and technology organization that is located in France, in Western France, as you can hear probably. And we are specialized in virtual reality and augmented reality, or all kind of immersive technologies. And we are a team of 15 persons, and we've been working in this area since more than 20 years now. And we joined the TIDE project with a role of consulting, like giving advices and sharing our knowledge on how to create virtual reality experiences. And that was also, the TIDE project was also the opportunity for us to discover a range of field of applications that we didn't know before. I'm talking about virtual heritage, of course. And virtual heritage is, actually there are many definitions of what virtual heritage is or can be. I've selected one among a lot, which states that virtual heritage is the use of computer-based interactive technologies to record, preserve or recreate artifacts, sites and actors of historic, artistic, religious and cultural significance and to deliver the results openly to a global audience in such a way as to provide formative educational experiences through electronic manipulations of time and space. And I think the last part of this definition is very important when it deals with experience, especially when we're addressing general public like we do in the TIDE project. To support these experiences, we focused in TIDE on different technologies, including mostly in virtual reality and augmented reality. Technically speaking, virtual reality is a real-time, interactive, immersive simulation. That means that this technology is able to immerse a user in a computer-generated, 3D computer-generated environment. That means that during this experience, the user is completely apart from the actual physical world he's actually staying. There's no direct relation with the virtual world and the physical world. So that's a wonderful tool, I think, to transfer people, users, to another location or to another time. On the other hand, augmented reality is a mix of real and virtual content. This is actually like an extra layer of digital content that is overlaid on reality. And this layer of digital content is anchored in the real world, just like this is an experience where physical and digital worlds are merged, fused together. So the actual physical world is really part of the experience in an AR simulation experience. Yes. So why VR and AR in museums? The first thing is quite easy, is VR is fun. We can't fight against it. I think we have all seen the smile on the face of someone that just tried a VR headset for the first time, and that's already enough. So that means that's already a very good start, because the technology by itself is very entertaining, is very, very nice, very fun. But also VR is engaging. VR brings stories to life, and here it comes to, this is where the experience comes in. Because VR has this power to move the user from a passive spectator role into an active actor of the experience. And we've seen why we can integrate VR in museum, but let's go into details with the what. And what exactly VR and AR can bring to cultural heritage. First thing is that We can access sites that would require some heavy equipment or some specific skills. I know there are a lot of divers here with a lot of underwater archaeologists here. This is typically the kind of activity that requires some equipment, some skills that is not accessible to everyone. So VR is probably a very interesting medium to make this wonderful job available to most people, to a wider audience, because you don't, in this case, you don't have to have a diving license. You don't have actually there's no risk at all. You don't have to carry the equipment and so on. So this is probably a very, very good use case. This is actually a very, very good use case. Yes. And you can also visit sites or part of sites that do not exist anymore. Obviously, if these do not exist anymore, that's pretty difficult to visit them in the real life. We can also see sites as they were. Sometimes these sites still exist, but they are just very different from what they used to be. They are not being maintained, or just the sense of the sites is just different. So once again, VR can help here and offer new perspectives. In VR and AR, especially in VR, you can do pretty much what you want. You can give your user superpowers, like, for example, the ability to fly, to change this point of view, alternating, for example, from some kind of egocentric, detailed point of view, and some much higher level exocentric point of views to give more context of the layout of the sites and things that are observed. Time traveling made easy, actually much easier than in the real life, once again. Avoid damaging historical sites by providing, for example, users with digital copies of sites or artifacts that they can use, manipulate without any risk for the original artifacts. And, of course, offer new media for cultural heritage transmission, which is new now. I can't tell about in 10 years, but VR and AR are still new now. And obviously, they can attract new categories of visitors, especially the younger ones. I won't go into details because I was a bit optimistic on the timing, but there are already, of course, some very, very good practices already deployed in different museums or venues. These examples are not small museums, like Conciergerie in Paris, Tate Museum in London, and Parvis de Notre-Dame in Paris. But these are examples that you got inspiration from, of course, in the TIDE project. And I will focus on the TIDE productions, of course. So in the project, we developed, we released 14 experiences, plus 2 shared experiences. By shared, I mean that there were trans-regional development of these 2 experiences. They were grouped among 4 themes, of course, the Spanish Armada, but also the Napoleonic Wars and the 2 World Wars, and the migrations over the Atlantic. And yes, most of them are already deployed in several venues. I think, if I remember well, the first one was deployed in Derry. It was last July, in July 2022. And very recently, in Madeira, the new one, AR, an augmented reality one, is being developed. But Dorita will tell you about that very soon. For communication about every experience, we have made trailers. I would just present the first one now, which which is Wrath of the Atlantic, Wrecks of the Armada, that is now available, demonstrated in Inishowen Maritime Museum in Donegal.
Wrath of the Atlantic, Wrecks of the Armada. These virtual reality shows will submerge you in historical facts and findings that has till now been hidden beneath the crushing waves of the wild Atlantic, all along the coastline of Donegal. To find out more, click go visit donegal.com.
And this one focuses on the story of two ships, La Gerona and La Trinidad Valenciana, both of the ships of the Armada.
Wrath of the Atlantic.
No. Yes, okay. I'll talk about the other one later. And for the second part of this talk, I'd like to give you, to share with you the creation process of the virtual heritage experience as we did it for during the project, by taking the example of one that was called Beware Convoy Below, and that was developed with people from Donegal, Derry, and Devon, the 3Ds, yes. And for this, to develop this experience, we got inspired from the creation pipeline, which is generally used in the video game industry. That makes sense here, and slightly adapted for virtual reality. So it all starts with the concept, basically an idea, if possible a good idea, and then have to transform this idea into a scenario, which is basically the story you want to tell to the users. And then, of course, you have to create the assets of the experience, mostly 3D assets, but not only. All the assets are then gathered and organized in an authoring package and then published to the audience. So let's start with the concept. So we need an idea, a good idea, and I remember for this one, it was brought by my friend Bill from a project in Buncrana for breakfast. I remember he told me about the kite balloons. I had no idea about what kite balloons were, really. And of course, no idea about their use, how they were used during World War I. So he told me about the convoys that were heading from America to Europe, how important they were, and how fragile, weak they were to threats, to menace, yes, to threats. And I thought that was a very good example, very good use case for a VR experience, because this kind of situation do not exist anymore, and it's hardly accessible, even if it existed anymore. So that was a perfect use case, and we decided to share it with the other partners, and it was adopted very easily. And then we started to do some documentation, of course, to ensure about the historical accuracy of our ideas. So we read a lot of books, archives, testimonials, and so interviews, and so on. And then the first draft, the first ideas come on the whiteboard, papers, and so on. And yes. Then we had to decide on the art direction, or artistic direction, by producing some concept arts, and the art direction is just the look and feel of the application, the experience we want to develop. Should it look like realistic, or maybe sketchy, or cartoony, or something else? And then comes the scenario, and this part is very important. This is, as I told you, basically the story you want to tell, But to tell this story, there are a lot of constraints because it has to be quite entertaining. There's a message you want to deliver to the users, and it has to be a smooth experience. It shouldn't be some sequence of just events. So it has to be really a narrative experience. And for that, we use a tool that is called a storyboard that is used in the video game industry as well, which is basically a comic strip where we put all the different major events of the story just to make sure that the story is consistent. And now that the story is defined, we can talk about hardware. Hardware is actually, of course, the VR hardware, or in case of the VR experience, which was the case here. The VR setup includes selecting what kind of headset or controllers or anything is compatible with the story you want to tell. Do we need some external accessory, physical accessories? Do we want or need some kind of bare hand interaction, or do we need controllers? What's the form factor of the controllers, and so on? We need cables, no cables, and so on. So that's always a question of trade-off, compromise. But we try to get the most of what is available so far. But hardware is not about VR only. It's also about the physical setup, the deployment in the museum. And for this experience, we decided to build an actual basket, kite balloon basket, and this has two main advantages. The first one is about safety, regarding safety, because when you wear a VR headset, you're not aware of the people that are around you, so you can easily hit. Yes, collision might happen. So that's what this physical basket is a way to separate, to identify different zones. The inner zone that is dedicated to the immersed user, and the outer zone where other people, other visitors can go. And the other advantage of this physical basket is that it improves the experience of the person that is immersed, because when he or she touches the basket, what he or she sees in the headset, it's actually the visuals and the touch, the haptics is registered, just makes sense. So that improves a lot this feeling of immersion, of presence and engagement in the simulation, in the application. Then comes the step of asset creation. So in this step, we just run to many photographs, many drawings, pictures, and blueprints, and so on, to document all the different parts of the assets that were to be involved in the experience. The result is that we can create historically accurate 3D assets, but it's not only mostly 3D assets, but we should not forget about other modalities like audio modalities. And like dialogues, for example, we spend quite a lot of time on dialogues to make them engaging, once again, and music as well. Music, the background music is very important. That's definitely not the same experience with and without the music. And finally, when all these steps are done, that's always very satisfying to display a couple of beautiful screenshots. And if you don't mind, Brendan, can you help me going back out of the presenting mode? I'd like to show the trailer that I left. Would you mind going up? No, up, not that much. Down, and stop. 13, please. And can you just click on the video on the right?
Welcome on board the HMS Margaret, the flower of the Royal Navy's destroyers. We're under attack. Can you see anything? There's a U-boat northwest of the convoy.
Thank you. This is only a very short trailer of an experience that lasts between 7 and 12 minutes, usually. If we go back to the last, almost the last one, I think. Yes, 24, please. Thank you very much. That was much easier. And I just, before I finish, I wanted to share with you a few lessons we have learned as a conclusion regarding two different axes, two different aspects. First one is on the design of the experience for such museum, niche museum, small museum. First one is the gameplay. That should be a no-brainer. That should be very, very easy to use. Maximum, if you use button, maximum one button, no fancy high-tech interaction techniques, no speech recognition and so on. We tried, we failed, definitely. Especially if the experience has to be self-attended. There's no one to help people to use it, which will be the case in most small museums. Emphasize interactive object affordances. That's pretty much the same. If there's no help, just everything has to be self-explanatory. The user don't have to wonder what is interactive, what can I do, what is this tool for. And cyber sickness is probably this is this feeling that you might experience, like being a bit sick, a bit nausea, when you have a VR headset. There are some tricks, some rules that we know so far. We don't know everything definitely because there are a lot of differences between persons. This might be really a pitfall for the adoption of virtual reality, in my opinion. So we have to be very careful about this one and really respect the set of rules that have been defined so far. And regarding storytelling, there's a major change between conventional media like a video, for example, where the director can exactly know where the user is looking at because it's on the screen. In VR, can have the case of the user is looking that way and the action is just happening there. And in this case, you missed it, you lose. So we have to add artifacts or workaround of things to help directing the attention of the user because it's not possible to take the control of this point of view. And finally, running the experience, operating the experience in a museum. VR and AR are still quite new technologies, so sometimes there is some maintenance to perform. So the staff has to be aware of that. There are some questions regarding health and hygiene, regarding this headset that everybody wears on this time. There are solutions, but they have to be implemented. And sometimes VR can be scary for some people, so I would like to insist on the fact we should prepare people to what they are going to experience with the explanations before they wear the headset and so on. Yes, I think I'm done. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Having, I think, once put on headset and walked into a door, I'm glad that you're taking the security quite serious. Now to our final speaker from the island of Madeira. There, the use of augmented reality has been effective in helping them tell the story of one of their own great migrations, linking this island nation with that of Hawaii. Please welcome Dorita Mendonça.
Hello, good afternoon to you all. I'll be very quick because it's almost lunchtime, so it's a challenge to be here. I would like to thank all of you. Thank you for this fantastic organization, to the Spanish Armada Conference, all the organization, to Ernacht for having us with TIDE. So we've learned so much with the partners. Congratulations to everything that has been done with this project. It's a great opportunity for a destination like us, like Madeira Island. So I feel a little bit out of place here, but with Lionel, he helped putting us in a different order at the end of this morning. So I will be, oh, here's the thing, okay, right, to the right, Brendan, thank you. So I'll just go through my presentation that has an initial, just some quick facts about Madeira Island, and then we'll jump to the outputs, to our project pilots within TIDE. No? Okay. So here are the partners, TIDE's partners. Fantastic group of identities, all in different areas, but altogether we have the same objectives of developing opportunities for bringing the past to the present through, as the logo of this conference, through new eyes. So, as I was saying, Madeira Island, for who doesn't know it or haven't been there, it's 1 hour and a half from Lisbon, so west of the African coast, and we are an archipelago. So we have 2 habited islands, Madeira and Porto Santo, and then we have some other beautiful islands where there's only some people living there to keep the islands. For example, just to give an idea, 2/3 of Madeira is a protected island. So we're very keen on preserving our natural assets. So we've been occupying an important position in national and international tourism settings. One of our main features are our hospitality, and I found this very similar to Irish. So we've been welcomed so much in these days. So in Madeira, you also feel at home. And it's one thing that our visitors take home, and something that we hear a lot of satisfaction about Madeira is people. We also combine tradition with modernity and, of course, our rich natural heritage. We have a very, very, very busy all-year entertainment calendar that starts with Carnival. Then we've just finished the Flower Festival, which is 4 weeks now. So if you ever want to visit Madeira for the Flower Festival in May, the next years will always be the first Sunday that starts, May Sunday, first Sunday of May, I'm sorry, and we start the Flower Festival then. So now we're entering the Atlantic Festival, then we still have the Wine Festival, Columbus Festival in Porto Santo Island, Nature Festival, and then, of course, we have our New Year and Christmas festivities. We also recently achieved an important mark for us, which was the Sustainable Tourist Destination seal. So we are now certified as a Sustainable Tourist Destination. We are very proud. And for example, TIDE helps us with one of our objectives, that is maintaining our our identity, our assets, sustainable, and that this tourism activity can last for more centuries, of course. We've also achieved, and we're very proud of this achievement too, for 8 times Europe's leading island destination and also world's leading destination. Why? I'll just show you in a quick, very quick few notes. So we have exuberant nature. We have a laurel forest that is UNESCO World Nature Heritage. Our safety. We have a wide range of sea and mountain activities for all ages. We have, as I showed, the tourist entertainment calendar for all year round. Our quality, our hotels are very known for their quality service. We have 600 years of history and culture, very proud of it too, and we are very close to the main European cities. Just some very quick numbers here. We've had about 2 million guests in 2022, so we have gone back to the numbers of pre-pandemic, about 10 million bed nights, and we've increased our total income revenue. Our top markets are Portugal, Germany, United Kingdom, and France. We want to see you more. Ireland, please. So now about our pilot projects, about TIDE outputs. So looking back on our history, our maritime history, we've looked through all the themes. We have so many that we can work on, and I've heard so many here, so many storytellings that also makes us thinking of so much that we have to do. This is the first pilot project that is connected to the bombardment of Funchal Bay by German submarines. So we were bombed twice with 1 year of apart. And in the first one, 3 ships, 2 French and 1 English were sunk. And a lot of areas of Funchal were also hit. And we will tell that story, taking our visitors through some of those places that are connected to this event. This is something that this pilot, the output, is being worked on as we speak here. So, and it will also use a lot of the technologies that Lionel explained so the long way to get there. So that was a lot of help. Thank you, Lionel. So as I was saying, we will link these places, which you can see here, and you have to visit. So to know them, you have to visit them. They are very close. Funchal is a very easy city to walk around. It's in walkable distance. And there's forts here. There's a port. There's of course, the main port where the ships were. So, and what we will do is we will have QR codes linking to the experiences. So we will have 3D modeling, and we will also have web apps linking to these places. And these links will also take you to pictures, to more information, of course, so that you can have more information about what happened in Madeira, in Funchal at this time. So this is just very quick about the first pilot project. About the second, which is the one that we will explain more in this presentation, it focuses the migrations and connects to the sugarcane and rum route that we actually have. So we actually have already some materials, but these materials that we are developing is to a juvenile public. So we have linked the 3 things. So a different public, our history about this, and of course what we already have about this theme. So what we want to do is, of course, to encourage tourists to learn, because it will involve not only the youngsters, but also their parents, their family, when they take the comic book home, which I will show you in a moment. And they will also encourage them to go to places in Madeira which are still connected to sugar plant theme. So this is, just to show you, this is what we have now, a physical brochure about the theme that has, among other information, some information about the actual production, about places to visit, a historical framework, what events are connected to the sugarcane and rum root. And this is what is our output. So it's a comic book with 20 pages. It's being printed as we speak. If somebody wants to have a look at it, I will have it here in print. And what's special about this comic book? So it has inside of it about 30 experiences, digital experiences around the story that it tells. And it has different levels of experience. And there are marked difference, as it's difficult to see here, but you'll see further. They have different, the QR codes have different colors. So the green ones goes to one type of experience, the blue one. So one of them, we will see further in the next slides. And the magenta, the pink one, goes to a different experience. So on 9th of June is the official launch of this output, TIDE output. It tells the story of thousands of Madeirians that left Madeira in the early 19th century, late 19th century to early 20th century, and they left their families. They left a Madeira that was overpopulated, looking for a different life. And they engaged with Hawaii that needed labor in their sugar plantation. And Portuguese were known for hard-working people, and we already had experience in the sugar plantation, so all these factors came together, and there they went for months and months. There's stories of 5 months of crossing Madeira down to Hawaii. And this comic book tells the stories in 20 pages, and will tell us the story of several characters, a musician, somebody that became a bishop, a young lady that sent letters home, and so much other. And this is also special because links the ukulele to Madeira, and will also bring to the present an important fact that Madeira took the ukulele to Hawaii. Sorry, I can't play the ukulele. I would bring one. See, so it tells a lot of the daily life in a very light way, or with his beautiful drawings of Roberto and his team. And it tells more stories ahead, but you'll have to look at the 20 pages that we will promote and send you also. So, just to show now, here we go to the QR codes. So, if you try, probably you could probably try to see if you can get the QR code there. So one of it is complete. One of the, I think it's the green one. Let me just check my notes. So this green one will have to ask you to put the image on the comic book. The blue one, you will see, if you go around The next one, if you go around, if you're in a room, it will show you different images in the room. As Lionel was saying, it will take you to another dimension with images connected to the story. Not sure if anybody's getting it? Yeah. Ah, nice. It works, yes. And the pink one, and this one is the one that will also take you to a 360 degrees experience. There's one of them that only works on a flat place. Okay. As Lionel was saying too, it's very fun. So it's fun and it's engaging because don't forget it's for a juvenile public. And we really hope, as yesterday I hope you also were there, we all experienced the Canon in C performance. So the same way we expect that this book will make them never forget about Madeira and the Madeirans that went to Hawaii. The same way I will not forget for sure what I heard yesterday and how it connects to us. So this is very important in the TIDES project, that what we want to do is tell stories in a different way. So in that different way of seeing things through the digital way, an engaging way, and now stories have to really reach us, and it's a way that we're on holidays, but we're learning things. So this is for our tourists that visit Madeira, but not only. So we also wish to engage residents and people that want to know a little bit more about Madeira's history. So, and now to the last, just finishing, to the last pilot project. This one also has a lot of work to do. We need to do some investigation. A lot of it has been done. We are planning to do some storytelling during June. That's the upcoming month. And then we will try to integrate this theme into a museum that's being also enlarged and trying to connect the theme, the shipwrecks in Porto Santo Island, which is connected to a main shipwreck that was there, from the 18th century, which is a Dutch galleon called the Slotbrugge. And it will also take people diving and thinking about our underwater heritage. So, and this is all. Thank you. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you, Dorita. So, while we ask our speakers to maybe take your places at the top table, we have maybe 10 minutes before we finish to take some questions. So, we have two microphones, Declan on this side, and have we a volunteer, Angus or Eddie? You might take that far side, please. And if anybody has a question to any of our guests, you could just raise your hand in a moment, and we'll take those questions as we can. And as I say, we've 10 minutes. Just while our guests are seating themselves, obviously we've had a couple of presentations this morning in the areas of augmented reality from Dorita and virtual reality. If we just had a show of hands, I mean, how many of you have been to a visitor experience, or maybe even at home or a museum, have put on the mask, have looked at something in virtual reality? Could I just see a show of hands? Yeah, lots. So like more than half, or at least half. So that's very interesting. And before we pass over to the floor, I have a question for Lionel. Okay, so I've been to Greencastle, and I've been to the Tower Museum, and I've checked all the wonderful experiences that you have. So the Trinidad Valancera and the World War I and the Derry migration experience. I suppose coming from a sort of a broadcaster background. I'm very interested in how this technology is going to evolve. And I wonder if you were to sort of, okay, so obviously one of the difficulties is when you go into a visitor centre, you have a single headset normally. So if you have a queue of people who want to get in and use this experience, you have to wait until the previous person finishes. So challenges, and you've mentioned some of the challenges. Technology is still growing and improving. But if you were to look forward and to project, because we understand that this technology, it's a fact of life, it's going to be there now. If you said in 10 years' time, what will that experience be like? Will people still be wearing the masks? Will you be able to get the technology that people will be able to have multiple users and you walk into a museum and everything is happening digitally? Yeah, sorry. And I didn't even get a bell from Declan. Yeah, yeah. Okay, sorry, yes.
No, I'll be, actually, I already forget most of your questions, but about 10 years, 10 years, it's on, is it? Is it on? Yes, okay. In 10 years, I guess, actually, I'm sure that we'll still need some kind of display system, probably not headsets, no head-mounted displays like we know now. There will probably be very, very small, like some kind of regular glasses, and this will happen in very less than 10 years. And I think we will be glad, we'll be happy. We have to wear something because that means that we can take it off and take it on when we want, and we still have the power to decide what we want to see. And probably in the future there will be some kind of novel interfaces with no hardware, no physical hardware. But this will raise a lot of issues, a lot of new questions. So far, in a couple of years, I guess the optimum will be reached with some easy to wear devices, but still something to wear.
Thank you. Okay, Declan, you have a question, haven't you, before we go any further?
Yeah, sorry, I can't wait till the microchips come in. I'm going to. I was fascinated by Pedro's talk on the Portuguese connection to the Armada, but I know you didn't get on to speak about your O'Donnell lineage, so maybe if you give us a brief, if it can be brief.
As a quick brief, well, the first reference to the O'Donnells in Portugal comes from Father Daniel O'Daly. It was a Dominican priest that went to Portugal in the 1630s, sorry, and he founded two schools in the monastery for priests and students to be priests and nuns in Lisbon, as in Ireland the Catholics were being persecuted by the Protestants. And that priest became important in the history of Portugal and England because he was one of the main architects of the marriage between Catherine of Braganza with Charles II. This was a great lecture that Declan Donny did last year in July in Lisbon. The relation to the O'Donnells is that Rory O'Donnell, the younger brother of Red Hugh O'Donnell, was his patron. So that's the first reference to the O'Donnells. Regarding my family, there is this Treaty of Windsor. It's the oldest military alliance in the world that is still going on today. And during the Napoleonic invasions of Portugal, he tried to invade for 3 times. The English sent an army to help the Portuguese. And that army was commanded by, his commander was Wellington, an Irishman. He was known for his bad temper and big nose as Old Nosey. And one of his officers was a guy named James Delaney O'Donnell. So James, after the war, met and married Harriet Edwards in Lisbon. He stood in Portugal and had 5 children, and from then on, we are in Portugal as a small but proud branch of the O'Donnells.
Hello, Michael Barry. Portuguese theme again, a question for Pedro, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I was very interested in your talk on the Portuguese input in the Armada, and there, of course, was the Squadron of Portugal, which was the Portuguese Navy, effectively. And I assume that after the nationalities, obviously Spanish, but that the Portuguese were the next biggest contingent of nationalities, along with all the other Mediterranean and a few Irish and presumably some from the Netherlands. But I'm just interested in the context, and maybe you might comment, because at the time you still had the pretender Dom Antonio, who was claiming he was king of Portugal, and like in the conquest of the Azores, most of the Azores were against the annexation by Spain. True. So I just wonder, and you mentioned the difficulty of the Portuguese officers adapting to the Spanish naval arrangements.
I would say that not all of them were in Lisbon, the crews. I believe that not all of them were against being on the Spanish Armada, but the Crown of Portugal was part of the Spanish Empire for just 8 years. So it was too recent for them to be used to the idea of being Iberian under the Spanish rule. Okay, so that would make the Navy with the Portuguese crews having a Spanish officer and commander would be something that they would not like, and would be, no, I wouldn't say try to undermine anything, but it wouldn't be that easy to accept to be...
But my question, which I was coming to, was just that I assume then that when the Armada set out from Lisbon, that they continued in the service of Philip II, and that they fought and died as much as
the Spanish,
yeah.
as much as the Spanish and other nationalities. Yes. Regarding Prior de Crato, that was one of the pretenders. Before the conquest of Lisbon in 1580, there were 7 pretenders, and Prior de Crato was not the most direct on the lineage. So that is so that one of the other daughters of Don Juan III, John III, became regent, and her son John IV became king in 1640.
Question for Paula, please. You intriguingly mentioned that the Senora della Rosario survived until 1618 and was incorporated into a wharf. Are you able to tell us where that wharf was, and is there any likelihood that it may be found, the wreck?
I think wreck is probably an overstatement. I think it would have been timbers. I think she was at Chatham rather than up in London, and I think she was actually broken up a few years later. I'd need to check this, but I think the wharf, for some reason, perhaps it was rebuilt. So, and as harbours tend to expand riverwards or seawards every time, well, as they expand rather than landward, I suspect that whatever little is left is now deep underground somewhere.
question for Dr. Connie Kelleher. I heard at one stage when I was in Farmhill Manor that Grania Whale and Queen Elizabeth I actually spoke in Latin when they met. Would that make sense?
Yeah, it would make sense. I mean, some of the Gaelic lords were able to speak Latin, and indeed others were able to speak continental languages because of their liaisons on the continent as well. And I've read that as well. One of the O'Driscolls, for instance, was referred to as on Gascunach because of his links to Gascony in Spain, and he could speak. And just the O'Driscoll's name themselves is O'Hidderskiol, which goes back to, it predates kind of surnames, and it means either between tales or between stories. So they were known as the interpreters. So they would interpret, and they were able to speak. So I would imagine a lot of the others, including Grania, had the Latin would have come from her, obviously, her Catholic upbringing, but it's not unknown that they didn't have other languages. Yeah.
I can just add to that. In 1579, there's a Spanish intelligence report about the ports and the bays and the islands off the coast of Ireland. It goes right around the island, and particularly what Connie has said, the O'Driscolls, the O'Sullivan Bears, the McCarthy Moors, the McCarthy Ray, they're all described as having Spanish as well as French and Latin. But Latin was the universal language at the time. So there's no problem with Irish fluent in other languages. They had their Irish, they had Norman French, which was spoken in Ireland, certainly in Hiberno-Norman Ireland, particularly in Munster, and they also had Spanish.
Would they have had English as well? Or?
They had some English, and it's interesting, Philip O'Sullivan Bear, the hero of Dunboy, he could write fluently in Hiberno-Norman French. He could write fluently in Irish. He could write fluently in Latin. And he learned Spanish as well. He had Spanish before he went to Spain. His English, however, is he uses an older form of English script. He doesn't use the more modern Renaissance script style of English that was used in the 15th century. He uses an older form of it. So does the Gerald, the last ruling Earl of Desmond. So it suggests that they're more in contact with continental Europe than they are with England. And that's borne out even later on in the 18th century and early 19th century, when Daniel Corkery wrote that the old houses of Munster, particularly the surviving Catholic families of Munster, they were more familiar with events in Paris, Vienna, Rome and Madrid than they were with Dublin or London. And we have English writers from the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, German travel writers and French in the 19th, they all remark upon, beyond Dublin, particularly the south and the west, people spoke Latin, and they spoke French, and they spoke Spanish.
Good afternoon. My name is Colin McColgan. I work for Airnect. And then my colleague, Dr. Katrina Strange, she's in the room here somewhere. She originally put this project together about 5 or 6 years ago, and obviously the museums and the regional governments in the project had a very positive experience. Now, obviously, we're beginning to look at where the TIDE project goes from here, and what we see is that it seems to be quite the use of VR seems to be a very powerful technology to use, for ancient artifacts and recreating ancient environments. And we would just be interested, just maybe with a quick show of hands, what the domain experts think about that. If it's something that would be of interest to be more widely used in your museums, for promulgating, disseminating knowledge about, for example, about the the Spanish Armada. So really interested to know if perhaps just with a show of hands, or not, whether you think this is a useful technology to be used in the future. Thank you.
Colin, you've confused us because now we don't know whether people want to ask questions or just hold their hands up. Any more questions? We've got one here. Yeah.
Well, I have two questions. One is for Connie. It's about the payment that Philip II did in 1553, you mentioned, for having rights of fishing here. So I wonder if there is any study done on that or research bigger. And it looks like there was going on. It looks like something that was regular, or probably it's not the first payment, or I don't know. But it makes me think also about how the DNA is linked with Spain and Ireland, that it might not be the very few of the Spanish Armada, but that goes way beyond far, that all this fishing trade with Spain, especially Galicia and Ireland, has been going for centuries and centuries. So it's, I guess, just to know if that document exists in Ireland, in the archives, or is in Spain, or if there is any research done on that relationship about the fishing trade and agreements with Philip II, and the fact that there would be fishermen, of course, coming to Ireland, maybe staying there, that could be settled. So that kind of
links,
if research on that.
Yeah, I'm only beginning to look at it myself. To be true, now Declan might have a better idea of wider documents like that. I'm looking at the cultural landscape, but it was one reference that I came across, and I thought it was very interesting because it had repercussions beyond the O'Malley's all along our coastline, really. And others perhaps were doing it as well, but certainly Spain was central to it, because we read about large fleets, particularly off the southwest coast, of 600 or more ships coming in to fish the waters of southwest Ireland, dominated by Spanish fishermen. So it was a huge industry, I suppose, really, at the time. With regard to the document, again, I came across it in Anne Chambers' a book referring to that. So if you refer to that, but certainly those documentations are there to be expanded on.
From my readings and that, I know the consideration from the Spanish point of Irish when they go to Spain with the Flight of the Earls, because the Milesians myth of the first kings of Ireland being from Spain, I know they were granted when they arrived to Spain a condition as Spanish citizens. They have the same rights. They were not considered foreign people to start business or get into the administration. They were considered Spanish because the Spanish kingdom had very present and considered them as Spaniards because that myth of the Milesians. So that was very important when they go to Spain. They are able to get into the administration. They are considered Spaniards for all the rights to trade and everything, not like others, like English would be considered foreign.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
With the Pope. So again, let's say they would have liaised there, and again, that was the reason they weren't allowed to go to Spain, because there was an alliance at that stage with Britain, which meant that the Earls headed, or let's say they were again coming down to, it wasn't the Earls themselves, it was down to Rome. They didn't actually end up going over there at that time. Now you did have, and I'm not, as I said, it all isn't in my head at the minute, in terms of Red Hugh, when he went, again, let's say that was to Spain.
Okay, thank you.
If I might just add to what Connie had said there. Yes, there have been publications by Basque historians, particularly about the Basque fisheries and their connections with Ireland. And the DNA of Irish people has been proven. The mapping that's been done by Trinity College shows the considerable DNA correspondence between Ireland and the entire north of Spain and the northwest coast of Portugal. So you're talking about Ibero-Celtic peoples. it is through the writings of Isidore of Seville that the Irish monasteries became aware of this, and they repeat that. So, right through the Middle Ages, there was that common belief about the Irish and the Spanish descending from the same stock originally. That is something that the Irish lords use when they open negotiations with the Spanish monarchy. As I said yesterday, 1529, the Treaty of Dingle between the representative of the Emperor Charles V and James XI, Earl of Desmond. That treaty enshrined the rights of citizenship in the entire one. And let's not forget your other Sligo descendant, who became Prime Minister of Austria and was the longest-serving Prime Minister under Kaiser Franz Joseph in the 19th century, early 20th century, Francis Taft, Reichsgraf von Ballymote.
Okay, I'm conscious, I'm sorry now that we're going to have to cut things a little bit tight, but we just want to hand over to Katrina for a final comment before we wrap things up.
I work for Airnact, and we're responsible for leading the TIDE project, so we put it together and we're managing it, and we're very, very fortunate to have such fantastic partners in Madeira, Clarty, Derry City and Strabane District Council, Donegal County Council, Devon County Council, Sligo, Spanish Armada as well, involved as an associate partner, and also the University of Cadiz that couldn't actually make it here today. So we've got, I was trying to count, and we've over 17 different pilots developed in the area of virtual reality and augmented reality, looking at the Spanish Armada, the Napoleonic era, the World Wars, and also the migrations. And the University of Cadiz also, it's unfortunate that they couldn't be here. They've developed a number of like underwater streaming buoys and things that to shipwrecks in their region that can stream all that information to, live to people on the surface, so that they can actually see what's happening below the sea, see the shipwrecks, and also monitor over time the changes that are happening. But the virtual reality, it's allowing all those partners to bring all that to the surface to the ordinary regular tourists that can't dive and see it. And as Ronan has said, they've had over 5,000 views of their VR. We also have another goal as part of this, is to promote this to right across the whole Atlantic region and further afield. And in doing that, we've developed a platform, which you can see a kind of a short video in the background there, and that's where we have documented all the assets in the different regions, and we're putting it on this platform. So that's to make it available to the different regions, and to connect regions and to develop niche kind of tourism products based on the Spanish Armada and different things. So if anybody is interested in that, please get in touch with us. And as Colin said, we're looking to you know, to carry this on, because VR is very topical at the minute. It's really, really interesting. A lot of regions are looking at it, and we're hoping to carry this on into a future project in some shape or form. So if anybody is interested in it, please get in touch with us, and we'll keep in touch for any future things. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Katrina. I'm sorry we've to cut the question and answer part short because our delegates have to make their way in for lunch, and we have a series of activities lined up for this afternoon. If anybody needs any of the information, Katrina, the TIDE contract details are all in the brochure, so feel free to bring that home with you, as well as our own details at Spanish Armada Ireland. Just really quickly, a couple of thank yous before we leave. I want to thank Colin McColgan and Katrina Strain of TIDE for enabling us to put together this conference here and providing us with the funding, as well as Carlos Garrea from the EU Atlantic Area Project. Here more locally, I want to pay a big thank you and tribute to Sligo County Council, Michael Carty and Dorothy Clark in particular, who've been superb supporters of everything that we've been trying to do. I want to just name check the TIDE speakers again. So yesterday and today we had a superb list of guests: Dr. Colin Martin, Finbar Moore, Pedro Luis Chinchilla, Dr. Paula Martin, Dr. Connie Kelleher, Rona McConnell, Dr. Pranny Rattigan, Dr. Declan Downey, Pedro O'Donnell Toscana, Lionel Dominjon, Dorita Mendonça, and Carmen Cabrera and Paloma Sanchez. Please give them one big round of applause again. Thank you. Finally, to everybody else who was involved, and you're far too numerous to mention individually, but to all of our food producers, so people really rode in behind this conference. It's amazing the local support that there is for this Armada vision that I suppose we all share. And so the food producers and Pranny was able to get people to do stuff, I'd say, for practically nothing over the past few days. So thanks a million to Pranny and to Marie for getting all of the food and the food producers and providers involved. To our wonderful musicians, Catherine Rattigan and her team who performed for us last night. To our own wonderful group here working and doing all of the technology and looking after things for us. We've Brendan Tierney, who's been working with me for a long time over the last few months, getting everything ready. He's our event organizer. Mark Kennedy, who is looking after all of the IT here. Frank McGovern from Corprint, who printed out all the documentation and the brochure that we have here. And of course, Vanessa and her team here at the Glass House. You might give them all a great round of applause as well. Thank you. I hope I haven't left anybody out, but I'm going to leave the best, I hope, to last, and that's our own Spanish Armada Ireland Committee, who every year just row up behind every project that we have. They got involved 6 months ago. I think the idea was first mooted that we might be able to run a conference here this afternoon, and over the past couple of days they all put the shoulder to the wheel. They do it all completely free of charge, like they do with Remembering the Armada, which I hope most, if not all of you, will be able to come back to this September, 15th to the 17th of September, or in future years, or maybe for all of them, who knows. So to all of our guests, thank you for coming in today. To all of our speakers, we look forward to an afternoon of activities, and thank you all, and Good Day Shiv Slán.